On my 32nd birthday, my grandmother handed me a check for $160,000. Minutes later, my own brother locked the dining room door and demanded I hand it over. When I refused, he slapped me across the face and threatened to call the police to have me arrested. I managed to escape and drove straight to the bank. But when the branch manager scanned that check, his face drained of all color. He locked his office door and told me I was the target of a federal investigation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. I am Nia, a 32-year-old wealth management advisor, and I am about to show you exactly what happens when the family scapegoat decides to play the game and win. The heavy mahogany doors of my parents' upscale Atlanta dining room slammed shut with a sickening thud. The metallic click of the lock turning echoed through the silent room. I stood at the end of the long dining table, still holding the crisp piece of paper Nana Pearl's lawyer had just handed me. It was a check for $160,000. The ink was barely dry, but the greed in my brother Trayvon's eyes was already boiling over. Trayvon was 35 years old and the self-proclaimed face of Black excellence in our local megachurch community. He wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my first car, and his gold watch caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us. But beneath that flashy exterior, he was the same entitled bully he had been since childhood. "Give it to me, Nia," he demanded. His voice was low, but edged with a dangerous kind of panic. He took a step toward me, holding out his hand. "That money was promised to me. It is for the church community housing project. You are just a glorified calculator. You do not need that kind of cash. Hand it over right now." I gripped the check tighter. The paper felt like a shield in my hand. I looked from Trayvon to his wife Kiara, who was leaning against the dining room archway. Kiara was draped in designer labels from head to toe, wearing a silk dress that belonged on a runway, not at a somber family meeting. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, looking at me like I was a piece of trash that had blown in from the street. "A community project," I shot back, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Is that what we are calling it now, Trayvon? Is that what you call the brand new Bentley parked in the driveway? Because, as a wealth management advisor, I know a bad investment when I see one. You are not building affordable housing for the congregation. You are funding your own lavish lifestyle while hiding behind Daddy's pulpit." Trevon's face twisted with rage. The polished megachurch developer mask completely shattered. "You think you are so smart because you manage money for rich people?" he sneered, taking another step closer. "You are nothing in this family, Nia. You are a 32-year-old single spinster who only shows up to make everyone else uncomfortable." Nana Pearl was confused at the end. She meant for that money to go to the ministry. She explicitly named me as the beneficiary, Trayvon. I said, standing my ground. She knew exactly what she was doing. "She knew you were draining the family dry. I am not giving you a dime of her money so you can pay off whatever shady debts you have racked up this time." I did not even see his hand move. The slap was so fast and so hard that it sounded like a gunshot in the closed room. The force of the blow threw me off balance. My vision flashed white with pain as my head snapped to the side. I stumbled backward, my heels catching on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. I crashed hard into the glass side table displaying my mother's expensive crystal vases. The glass shattered underneath me, sending sharp shards scattering across the hardwood floor. A searing pain shot up my arm as I landed in the wreckage, but I refused to drop the check. I held onto it like my life depended on it. "Oh my goodness!" Kiara shrieked, stepping carefully away from the mess. "Do not bleed on my mother-in-law's rug, Nia. Are you crazy? Look what you did to the table. Just hand over the money and get out of here before you break anything else." I tasted copper in my mouth. Blood was trickling from my cut lip. I looked up at my brother, who was standing over me, breathing heavily. His fists were clenched at his sides. "Hand over the check," Nia, Trayvon commanded, his voice shaking with furious entitlement. "Hand it over right now or I am calling 911. I will tell them you lost your mind because you were cut out of the primary will. I will tell them you attacked me and tried to steal church funds. Who do you think the police will believe? the respected community developer, or the bitter, jealous sister? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, waving it in my face. Kiara nodded in agreement, pulling out her own phone to back him up. "I will record the whole thing," she threatened with a malicious smile. "We will show the world how crazy you really are. Give him the check, Nia." They actually thought I would fold. They thought the years of being pushed aside, talked down to, and treated like the family scapegoat had completely broken my spirit. They expected me to cry, to apologize, to hand over my only inheritance just to keep the peace. But the Nia who used to beg for their approval died a long time ago. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I slowly pushed myself up off the floor, ignoring the sharp sting of glass scraping against my skin. Trayvon smirked, thinking I was about to surrender. He reached his hand out, expecting me to place the check into his palm. Instead, I grabbed the heavy wooden dining chair next to me and shoved it forward with every ounce of strength I had. The heavy legs of this chair slammed directly into Trayvon's shins. He let out a loud shout of pain and stumbled backward, clutching his legs. Kiara screamed, dropping her phone as she lunged to help him. I did not waste a single second. I grabbed my purse from the table, unlocked the side door, and bolted out of the house. The humid Atlanta air hit my face as I sprinted down the driveway toward my car. I could hear Trayvon shouting obscenities from the doorway, yelling that I was a thief and a failure and that I would pay for this. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I peeled out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the pristine pavement, and sped down the suburban street. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My cheek was throbbing from where Trayvon had struck me. But as I glanced down at the passenger seat where the check lay safely inside my purse, a sudden chilling realization washed over me. Nana Pearl was a retired schoolteacher. She lived a modest life. She clipped coupons and drove a 10-year-old sedan. Where on earth did she get $160,000 to leave to me? And why was Trayvon so desperately willing to commit assault to get it back? I needed answers, and I needed them immediately. I drove straight past my apartment and headed directly to the downtown financial district. I was not going to let Trayvon spin this narrative. I was going to secure these funds and then figure out exactly what my brother was hiding. The drive into downtown Atlanta felt like a blur of blaring horns. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the last few weeks. Nana Pearl had been acting strangely before her sudden passing. She had been asking me highly specific questions about corporate tax structures and offshore accounts. At the time, I thought she was just taking an interest in my career as a wealth management advisor. I explained how shell companies worked and how funds were moved to avoid detection. Now those conversations felt like a giant red flag. She was not making conversation. She asked for a consultation because she knew something was wrong. I parked and ran inside. I bypassed the waiting area of First Heritage Bank and walked directly toward the glass-paneled office of the branch manager. Mr. Washington was a meticulous man with decades of banking experience. He had always respected my financial acumen. When he looked up from his computer and saw me standing in his doorway, his welcoming smile instantly vanished. "Nia, what happened to your face?" he asked, standing up so quickly his leather chair hit the wall. "You look like you were in a car accident. Do I need to call a medic?" I shook my head and closed the heavy glass door behind me, ensuring we had complete privacy. "I am fine, Mr. Washington. I do not need a doctor. I need your help with a transaction, and I need it done quietly and immediately." I walked over to his large mahogany desk and placed the check right in the center of his blotter. I smoothed out the slight creases my trembling fingers had made. "I need to deposit this into my secure holding account. It is an inheritance from my grandmother. She passed away last week, and her lawyer just handed this to me." Mr. Washington adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and leaned forward. I watched his eyes scan the handwritten amount, $160,000. He nodded sympathetically, clearly assuming this was a straightforward bereavement deposit. But as his eyes moved down to the routing numbers printed at the bottom of the check, his entire demeanor changed. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and terrified. He looked from the check to my bruised face and back again. His hands began to visibly shake. He reached out and snatched the check off the desk, holding it close to his chest, as if it were a live grenade. He scrambled over to the windows and quickly pulled the cord, snapping the horizontal blinds shut to block anyone in the lobby from seeing inside. He rushed to the door and turned the deadbolt lock with a loud click. "Ms. Vance," he whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "Please tell me you did not write this. Please tell me you have absolutely no knowledge of the origin of these funds. Because if you do, I am legally obligated to call the federal authorities right this second." I stared at him, completely bewildered. "What are you talking about, Mr. Washington? It is a certified check from my grandmother, Nana Pearl. Her lawyer gave it to me not an hour ago." "Why are you locking the door?" He walked back to his desk and turned his computer monitor so I could see the screen. He rapidly typed in the routing sequence from the check and hit enter. A massive red banner flashed across his banking software, displaying urgent warning codes and federal hold notices. "Nia," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "this check is not drawn from your grandmother's personal savings. It is not a retirement account or a life insurance payout. This check is drawn from an offshore corporate shell account, an account that is currently holding over $6 million. My heart dropped into my stomach. $6 million. That was impossible. My family was wealthy by megachurch standards, but they did not have $6 million sitting in liquid cash offshore. And that is not the worst part." He continued, pointing a trembling finger at the red warning banner on his screen. "This specific corporate entity was red flagged by the Internal Revenue Service 48 hours ago for severe money laundering. The funds are tied to a massive federal investigation." I leaned heavily against the edge of his desk, my knees feeling weak. But how did Nana Pearl get a check from a cartel money laundering account? She was an 80-year-old retired teacher. Mr. Washington looked at me with a mixture of profound pity and absolute terror. He took a deep breath. "Because Nia, the registered owner of this illicit corporate shell company, the sole proprietor who is legally responsible for the $6 million of dirty money sitting in this account is you. The corporate ID matches your social security number. This is your account." The room started to spin. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out the soft hum of the air conditioning. My identity. My social security number. Suddenly all the pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. Trayvon. 3 years ago, Trayvon had come to me begging for help with a real estate tax issue. He claimed he needed my professional credentials to verify some community development forms for the church. Like a loyal sister, I had provided my signature, my social security number, and my financial advisory license details. I trusted him. I trusted my father, the bishop, who assured me Trayvon was doing the Lord's work. They had not built a community center. Trayvon had stolen my identity. He used my pristine financial record and professional license to set up a labyrinth of offshore shell companies. He was laundering millions of dollars of church tithes and illicit loans right under the noses of the congregation. He deliberately put everything in my name so that when the federal government finally caught on, I would be the one going to federal prison. I was the designated fall guy. I looked down at the check again, reading the memo line. Nana Pearl had written Proverbs 16:11 in her shaky handwriting. "A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work." Nana Pearl had found out. She must have discovered Trayvon's ledger or overheard a conversation. She knew my brother was framing me for a multi-million-dollar federal crime. But why this exact amount? Why $160,000? Then I remembered a rumor I had heard from a client weeks ago. Trayvon borrowed heavily from a dangerous underground loan shark to cover his gambling debts, and the final payment was exactly $160,000. Nana Pearl did not leave me an inheritance. She left me a warning. She intentionally triggered this withdrawal to force me to come to the bank and discover the shell account before the FBI kicked down my door. She used Trayvon's own debt money to expose his criminal empire to me. "We have to freeze it," I said, my voice suddenly sharp and authoritative. "Mr. Washington, you have to freeze my access to this account immediately. I did not open this LLC. My brother stole my identity. I can lock the portal from this terminal," he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But Nia, you do not understand the gravity of this situation. The federal authorities are already watching this money. The moment this check was scanned into our system, it sent an automated ping to the Financial Crimes Unit. They know you are here. I pulled out my tablet from my torn purse. My mind shifted into pure survival mode. I was a top-tier wealth management advisor. I knew how to trace money and secure it. If Trayvon thought he could make me the sacrificial lamb for his greed, he severely underestimated my skills. I bypassed the bank's network and used my own secure cellular hotspot. Since the shell company was legally registered in my name, I initiated a master password reset. If I was going to be blamed for $6 million of dirty money, I was going to ensure Trayvon could not access a single penny of it to fund his escape. I need you to print out the ultimate beneficial owner registry for this account, I commanded, snapping into my corporate persona. I need physical proof that these funds were routed through my brother's IP address. He has been running this operation from the church offices. I can prove it if I have the transaction timestamps. Mr. Washington quickly hit print on his machine. The printer hummed to life, churning out pages of damning financial records. Nia, you need to take these documents and go straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he urged, stacking the warm papers and shoving them into a manila folder. Do not go home. Do not go to your family. You need to turn yourself in as a victim of identity theft before they issue a warrant for your arrest. Suddenly, flashing blue and red lights reflected against the closed blinds. The bright strobes painted the walls in an eerie glow. The wail of police sirens cut through the heavy silence. Mr. Washington peeked through the slats and gasped loudly. The federal agents are already here. But as I looked out, I saw local Atlanta police cruisers completely blocking the exit. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Yvonne. Come to the church office immediately. Trayvon just reported you to the police for grand larceny and elder abuse. You have disgraced this family. The cold steel of the handcuffs dug into my wrists as I sat in the windowless interrogation room. The walls were painted a sickly institutional green, and the single fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed with a relentless, irritating hum. I stared at the scarred metal table in front of me, refusing to let the panic show on my face. My cheek still throbbed violently from where Trayvon had struck me. The blood had dried into a tight crust near the corner of my mouth. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I was a wealth management advisor. I handled multi-million-dollar portfolios and navigated complex financial regulations every single day. I was not going to let a local precinct intimidate me over a fabricated family dispute. The heavy metal door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. 2 detectives walked in. The lead detective, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cynical scowl, tossed a manila folder onto the table. His partner, a younger woman with a notepad, leaned against the closed door. They looked at me with the tired annoyance of officers who thought they had an open and shut case. We have a very clear picture of what happened today, Ms. Vance, the lead detective said, pulling out a digital audio recorder. Your brother Trayvon Vance is a highly respected developer in this community. He claims you showed up at his house uninvited, demanded money from your grandmother's estate, and assaulted him when he refused. He also claims you stole a check for $160,000 off his dining table. Before I could speak, the detective pressed play on the recorder. Kiara's shrill, frantic voice filled the small room. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Please send officers immediately. Kiara sobbed on the recording, her voice trembling with fake terror. My sister-in-law, Nia, just went crazy. She attacked my husband. She shoved him into a glass table and stole a check from his office. She is screaming that she deserves the church money. Please hurry. She is completely out of control. The detective stopped the recording and slammed his hands flat on the table, leaning into my personal space. You want to explain why a respected church leader and his wife are calling 911 on you in tears. Do you want to explain why we found you at First Heritage Bank, trying to deposit the exact stolen check they described? I did not flinch. I looked the detective dead in the eye and let a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. If you are finished playing the amateur theater hour recording, I would like you to look at the actual physical evidence you confiscated from me. I am a licensed wealth management advisor. I hold Series 7 and Series 66 licenses. I manage wealth for clients whose net worth exceeds the budget of this entire police department. Do you really think I would engage in petty theft and assault over a single check? The younger detective scoffed. People do crazy things for money, Ms. Vance. Your brother said you were bitter about being left out of the primary will. My brother is a degenerate liar. I snapped, my voice slicing through the stale air of the interrogation room. Open the folder. Look at the check. You arrested me for grand larceny. Read the name on the account the check is drawn from. The lead detective frowned, clearly irritated by my absolute lack of intimidation. He flipped open the manila folder and pulled out the evidence bag containing the check. He stared at it for a moment, his brow furrowing as he read the printed text. Read it out loud, I demanded. Read the name of the corporate entity and the authorized signatory. The detective cleared his throat, sounding suddenly less confident. The check is drawn from an offshore holding company registered to Ania Vance. Exactly, I said, leaning forward as far as the handcuffs would allow. The check is drawn from an account in my own name. Why on earth would I violently assault my brother and destroy his furniture to steal a check that is literally withdrawing funds from my own corporate account? How do you steal your own money, detective? The younger detective stepped away from the door, her skepticism shifting into confusion. That does not make any sense. If it is your account, why is your brother claiming you stole church funds? Because my brother is running a massive financial fraud operation, I declared, projecting my voice so every word echoed off the concrete walls. Trayvon Vance stole my identity. He used my professional licensing credentials and my social security number to open a network of offshore shell companies. That specific account holding the check you are looking at currently contains over $6 million. It was red flagged by the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network 48 hours ago for severe money laundering. The lead detective let out a harsh laugh, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. You expect us to believe that a prominent megachurch developer is secretly laundering millions of dollars and framing his sister. I expect you to do your jobs, I fired back. Call the FBI Financial Crimes Unit right now. Run that routing number through the federal database. You will see the active red flag. You will see that the IP addresses accessing that offshore account trace directly back to the secure servers at my father's megachurch, where Trayvon operates his real estate business. He set me up as the fall guy. My grandmother discovered the ledger before she died. She wrote that check for $160,000 because that is the exact amount Trayvon currently owes to an illicit underground lending syndicate. She gave it to me so I would be forced to go to the bank and discover the shell account before the federal agents raided my apartment. The room fell dead silent. The detectives exchanged a long, uneasy look. They were local cops used to handling domestic disputes and petty theft. They were not equipped to handle a multi-million-dollar international money laundering syndicate involving the city's most powerful religious family. If you process my arrest for stealing that check, I continued pressing my advantage ruthlessly, you will be officially entering a federal financial crime into your local evidence log without notifying the proper alphabet agencies. You will be interfering with an active IRS investigation. Do you want to be the officer who ruins a federal sting operation because you fell for a fake crying routine from a woman wearing stolen Chanel? The lead detective grabbed the evidence bag and the folder. Watch her, he barked at his partner before rushing out of the interrogation room. I sat in the uncomfortable chair for what felt like hours. The younger detective paced back and forth, occasionally glancing at me with a mixture of awe and apprehension. I kept my posture perfectly straight. I refused to massage my aching wrists. I was calculating my next move. Trayvon had panicked. He knew the money was frozen. He knew I had seen the routing numbers. He was trying to use the local police to lock me up and discredit me before I could reach the federal authorities. Finally, the heavy door opened again. The lead detective walked in, looking visibly pale and sweating slightly around his collar. He walked straight behind my chair and unlocked the handcuffs. The heavy metal cuffs fell away, clattering onto the table. "You are free to go, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice tight with suppressed anxiety. "Did you make the call?" I asked, rubbing the deep red indentations on my wrists. "We contacted the regional FBI field office," he admitted, refusing to meet my eyes. "The routing number on that check is tied to a frozen asset protocol. This is entirely out of our jurisdiction. The charges of assault and theft have been dropped pending the federal review. He slid my personal belongings across the table, including my purse and my cell phone. But I need to give you a formal warning, Ms. Vance. The federal agents confirmed that your name is the only one legally associated with those offshore accounts. As of right now, you are the prime suspect in a massive federal investigation. They will be coming for you. You are not to leave the state. I grabbed my phone and slipped it into my purse. I am not running anywhere, detective. I am going to tear my brother's empire down brick by brick. I walked out of the precinct, breathing in the humid evening air. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I pulled out my phone to arrange for a ride home. As the screen lit up, a notification popped into view. It was a text message from my mother, Yvonne. Come to the church office immediately. You have disgraced this family for the last time. Do not make us send security to drag you here. I stared at the glowing screen. A bitter laugh escaped my bruised lips. They actually thought they still had power over me. They thought they could summon me to their pristine sanctuary and force me back into submission. I hailed a premium rideshare service. I was not going to hide. I was going to walk straight into the lion's den. Section 4. 1,500 words. The ride to the Vance Family Ministries campus took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like a journey into another dimension. The megachurch was a sprawling complex of modern glass and steel sitting on 50 acres of prime real estate. It looked more like a corporate headquarters for a Fortune 500 company than a place of worship. As my driver pulled through the gilded security gates, I watched the manicured landscaping and the private parking garage reserved for the senior pastoral staff glide by. This entire empire was built on the backs of hard-working people seeking spiritual guidance, and my family was using their devotion to fund a criminal enterprise. I stepped out of the car and walked through the soaring glass doors of the administrative wing. The security guards recognized me immediately. They did not smile or offer their usual greetings. They simply stepped aside and watched me with cautious, wary eyes. They had clearly been briefed on the narrative my family was spinning. I walked past the marble fountains and the digital donation kiosks, heading straight for the executive elevator. I pressed the button for the penthouse suite where my father, Bishop Jerome, held his daily court. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area decorated in rich mahogany and Italian leather. The receptionist was absent. The heavy double doors leading to my father's inner sanctum were slightly ajar. I pushed them open and stepped inside. The office was a monument to excessive wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. A massive custom-built desk sat at the far end of the room, flanked by enormous bookshelves filled with theological texts that I knew my father had never actually read. They were all waiting for me. Bishop Jerome sat behind his desk, wearing a bespoke three-piece suit, his hands steepled under his chin. My mother, Yvonne, stood by the window, clutching a designer handbag like it was a shield. Trayvon paced the floor near the leather seating area, his leg clearly favoring the shin I had battered with the dining chair earlier that afternoon. Kiara sat on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be bored, but failing to hide the anxious tension in her shoulders. No one said a word as I walked to the center of the room. I stood tall, refusing to shrink under their collective glare. My bruised cheek throbbed, but I kept my face utterly impassive. "You wanted to see me," I said, breaking the silence. My voice was crisp and professional, the exact tone I used when dismantling a bad portfolio for a client. Yvonne marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. She snatched a thick legal document from my father's desk and threw it directly at my chest. The stapled pages hit my jacket and fluttered to the floor, landing at my feet. "Sign it, Nia," my mother commanded, her voice vibrating with cold fury. "Confess to embezzling the money. Confess to setting up those offshore accounts. Trayvon is the face of Black excellence in this city. He is expanding our church's legacy through the new community housing initiative. You are 32 years old, single, and entirely expendable. We have already contacted our legal team. We will hire the best defense attorney in the state for you. We will ensure you get a favorable plea deal for probation." I looked down at the document on the floor. It was a fully drafted confession admitting to sole culpability for the $6 million money laundering operation. They had prepared it before I even arrived at the bank. They had this ready to go. I slowly looked up from the paper, meeting my mother's furious gaze. Expendable, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Is that what I am to you, Yvonne? Expendable. Like when you and Dad forced me to co-sign Trevin's first business loan when I was 21 years old. Do you remember that? You guilted me into putting my name on the line so your golden boy could play CEO. He defaulted within 6 months and ruined my credit for a decade. I had to work 3 jobs to pay off his debt while he drove a leased Mercedes. And now you're asking me to go to federal prison for him. Treven stopped pacing and pointed a trembling finger at me. You owe this family, Nia. I am building an empire that uplifts our people. You just push numbers around on a screen for rich white clients. The church needs my vision. If I go down, the community housing project goes down. The congregation loses everything. I let out a sharp, biting laugh. Stop hiding behind the congregation, Trayvon. You are not building housing for anyone but yourself. I know exactly how you operate. You funnel the church tithes into your boutique construction firm, overcharge the ministry for phantom materials, and route the excess cash through Kiara's luxury boutique to wash it clean. You use my professional license to create the offshore LLCs because you knew your own financial history would never pass a basic compliance check. You are a parasite feeding off our father's flock. Kiara leaped up from the sofa, her face contorted with rage. Shut your mouth, Nia. You are just a bitter, jealous spinster. You have always hated Trayvon because he is the successful one. He is the one carrying the Vance name into the future. You are just a glorified accountant. I turned my absolute focus onto Kiara. And you are a glorified fence, Kiara. Do not think I have not looked into your little boutique. You report hundreds of thousands of dollars in monthly dress sales, but your inventory imports do not match your revenue. You are washing Trayvon's dirty money through fake retail transactions. When the FBI audits your point-of-sale system, you will be sharing a cell right next to him. Kiara gasped and stepped back, sinking onto the sofa as the reality of her legal exposure finally hit her. Enough, Bishop Jerome suddenly boomed, his deep baritone voice echoing off the glass walls. He stood up from behind his desk, towering over the room. He walked slowly toward me, his expression set in lines of rigid, self-righteous authority. God tests us all, Nia, my father intoned, placing his hands behind his back. He calls upon us to make sacrifices for the greater good. Your brother has a divine mission to expand this ministry. He has made some financial missteps, yes. He acted with zeal rather than caution, but his heart is dedicated to the church. Your sacrifice today will save your brother's calling. It will protect the legacy of this family. If you sign that document, we will ensure you are taken care of financially for the rest of your life. I stared at the man who had raised me, the man who stood at a pulpit every Sunday and preached about integrity, truth, and moral fortitude. He was asking his own daughter to take the fall for a massive federal crime to protect his fraudulent empire. And if I refuse, I asked, locking eyes with my father. Jerome's face hardened into a mask of pure ice. If you do not sign that confession right now, you are no longer a Vance. You will be dead to us. We will use every resource this megachurch possesses to destroy your career. We will publicly denounce you to the congregation. We will testify against you in federal court and swear that you acted alone out of jealousy and greed. You will have absolutely nothing. The silence in the room was absolute. They waited, expecting the threat of total excommunication to break me. They expected the frightened little girl who always craved their validation to finally submit to their will. I slowly bent down and picked up the confession document from the floor. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of the thick paper. I looked at my mother, who was nodding encouragingly. I looked at Trayvon, who was smirking with premature victory. I looked at my father, who stood waiting for my obedience. I gripped the top edge of the document and ripped it violently down the middle. The sound of tearing paper slashed through the quiet room. I ripped the document again and again until it was nothing but jagged shreds in my hands. I threw the torn pieces directly onto my father's pristine mahogany desk. I was never advanced to you anyway, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I was never a daughter or a sister. I was just collateral. I was just a safety net for your golden boy to fall back on when his incompetence caught up with him. Yvonne gasped, clutching her chest. How dare you speak to your father that way? You ungrateful, wretched girl. I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes fixed on my father and brother. You think you can destroy my career, Bishop? You think you can silence me? I am a licensed forensic accountant and a fiduciary wealth advisor. I have already secured the digital footprints tracing the offshore funds back to your church servers. I have the IP logs. I have the routing histories. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit is already reviewing the data from the bank. Trayvon's face went ashen. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the leather sofa. You are lying. You could not have bypassed the security protocols that fast. I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. You used my identity, Trayvon. That means I have master administrative access to every single account you opened in my name. I locked you out of the offshore portal 30 minutes ago. You cannot move a single dime of that $6 million. Keep your golden boy close, Bishop, I said, turning my back on them and walking toward the heavy double doors. Because when the federal agents raid this spectacular glass palace, I am making sure he takes every single one of you down with him. I pushed the doors open and walked out of the penthouse suite. I did not look back. I strode to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and prepared for war. The battle lines were drawn, and I was going to dismantle their entire fraudulent empire piece by piece. The next morning, the sun rose over Atlanta, but the heat of my family's betrayal still burned in my chest. I knew Trayvon and my parents would not just sit back. They would launch a preemptive strike to discredit me, ensuring that if I went to the authorities, I would look like a disgruntled, unstable liar. Their favorite weapon for social assassination was Kiara. By noon, I knew exactly where she would be. The Black Excellence in Business Women's Luncheon was the premier networking event for Atlanta's elite female entrepreneurs, held monthly at the heavily gated Buckhead Country Club. I was a dues-paying member, though I rarely attended. Today, it was my battlefield. I walked into the opulent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in heavy white linen. Waiters in pristine uniforms glided across the room carrying trays of champagne. I spotted Kiara immediately. She was holding court at a center table surrounded by women dripping in diamonds and influence. I took a seat at an adjacent table close enough to hear every poisonous word spilling from her mouth. She had not noticed me yet. It is just a tragedy, Kiara sighed, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. She pitched her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Nia had a complete mental breakdown yesterday. We are all so worried about her. She actually attacked Trayvon over Nana Pearl's will. She is so bitter about being single and stuck in a cubicle while Trayvon builds his empire. We are looking into getting her psychiatric help. The women at the table gasped, murmuring sympathetic sounds. One of them, a prominent real estate broker, shook her head. I always thought Nia was the quiet, responsible one. To attack her own brother over money. That is disgraceful. Jealousy is a sickness, Kiara agreed, sipping her mimosa. Trayvon does so much for the community and Nia just wants to tear him down. She even tried to steal a check meant for the church housing project. We had to call the police to escort her away. I did not yell. I did not throw my drink. I simply opened my leather tote bag and pulled out my high-powered tablet. Trayvon thought he was a mastermind by putting his entire illicit financial network in my name to frame me. But his arrogance was his fatal flaw. Because I was the sole legal proprietor of his shell companies, I had master administrative access to every single corporate account, including the ones he used to fund his wife's vanity projects. I tapped the screen, bypassing the security firewall using my thumbprint. I navigated directly to the ledger for Melanin and Silk Kiara's supposed luxury boutique. Trayvon used her store as a massive money laundering front, funneling the stolen megachurch tithes through fake retail sales. I pulled up the real-time financial manifests, cross-referencing the inventory imports with the reported revenue. The numbers were hilariously sloppy. Trayvon was a terrible criminal. I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward Kiara's table. The soft click of my heels against the marble floor drew the attention of the women around her. Kiara looked up, and the fake sympathy instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. A mental breakdown, Kiara? I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the quieted ballroom. Is that the narrative Trayvon told you to spin today? Because if we are going to talk about finances and theft in front of Atlanta's finest businesswomen, I think we should talk about your boutique. Kiara's face flushed a deep, angry red. Nia, you are not welcome here. Security will remove you if you cause a scene. I ignored her threat and placed my tablet right in the center of her table, turning the screen so the prominent women around her could see the glaring red spreadsheets. Melanin and Silk reported $300,000 in retail sales last month, I stated, projecting my voice so the surrounding tables could hear every syllable. That is an incredibly impressive figure for a boutique that only operates 4 days a week. But here is the interesting part, Kiara. I pulled your shipping and receiving manifests. According to the international freight logs, your store only imported 20 dresses from your manufacturer in China last month. So please explain to these brilliant businesswomen how you made $300,000 selling 20 dresses. Are your garments woven from solid gold, or are you just laundering the church tithes to hide my brother's crimes? The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The women at the table stared at the tablet, their eyes widening, as their own business acumen processed the undeniable evidence of fraud. Money laundering was not a rumor. It was math, and the math was sitting right in front of them. Shut up, Kiara hissed, lunging forward to grab the tablet. I snatched it away smoothly before she could reach it. You parade around this city acting like a titan of industry, I continued relentlessly. But you are nothing but a glorified fence for stolen money. You and Trayvon set up those shell companies in my name to make me the fall guy when the FBI finally audited the church. But you forgot that I am a licensed forensic wealth advisor. I hold the keys to the kingdom. A waiter nervously approached the table holding a leather billfold. Kiara had apparently offered to cover the extravagant champagne tab for her entire group. Excuse me, Mrs. Vance, the waiter stammered. Your card was declined. Kiara whipped her head around, her eyes bulging. That is impossible. Run it again. It is a corporate black card. I did run it again, ma'am, the waiter said, shrinking back from her fierce glare. The bank has frozen the account. I smiled, tapping the screen of my tablet. Yes, they did. Because as the sole legal owner of the overarching LLC, I just froze every single corporate credit card associated with Melanin and Silk. I also flagged the accounts for suspicious activity. Have fun paying for this luncheon, Kiara. I hear the country club does not take "I owe us" from federal suspects. Kiara completely lost whatever remained of her polished composure. A guttural scream erupted from her throat. She knocked over her mimosa glass, sending orange juice and champagne spilling across the white linen tablecloth. She lunged at me, her manicured hands hooked like claws aiming straight for my face. I stepped back smoothly, letting her momentum carry her forward. She crashed into the neighboring chair, knocking it to the ground. Before she could recover and swing at me again, 2 burly country club security guards rushed into the ballroom. They grabbed Kiara by the arms, hauling her backward. She thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She called me a liar, a thief, and promised that Trayvon would destroy my life. The elite women of Atlanta watched in stunned, horrified silence as the so-called face of black excellence was dragged out of the country club, kicking and screaming like a common criminal. I picked up my tablet, adjusted my jacket, and walked out of the ballroom with my head held high, leaving the whispers and gasps behind me. I reached my car in the parking lot and locked the doors. The adrenaline was slowly fading, leaving a cold, hard clarity in its wake. I had publicly humiliated Kiara and frozen their immediate access to the laundered funds, but I still needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed the undeniable proof that would put Trayvon in federal prison and clear my name completely. I opened my purse and pulled out the original certified check for $160,000. I stared at the handwritten ink. Nana Pearl was the sharpest woman I had ever known. She did not do anything by accident. I looked at the memo line again. Proverbs 16:11. A just weight and balance are the Lord's, all the weights of the bag are his work. I repeated the verse out loud. Weights of the bag. It was a clue about where the real evidence was hidden. When I graduated from college with my finance degree, Nana Pearl had given me a beautiful leather-bound study Bible. She had told me to always keep my balances just and my heart honest. That Bible was sitting on the bookshelf in my apartment. I started the engine and drove out of Buckhead, heading straight for my apartment complex in Midtown. My mind raced as I navigated the heavy afternoon traffic. Nana Pearl had discovered Trayvon's ledger. I was certain of it. She must have hidden it and used the check as a dead man's switch to point me toward the evidence if anything happened to her. I pulled into my secure parking garage and hurried up the elevator to my floor. My apartment was a highly upgraded smart home equipped with top-tier security protocols. I punched in my key code and the heavy door unlocked. The apartment was quiet and exactly as I had left it. I walked directly to the mahogany bookshelf in my home office and pulled down the thick leather-bound Bible. I flipped through those delicate pages, turning directly to the book of Proverbs. When I reached chapter 16, I stopped. The page was slightly thicker than the rest. Nana Pearl had meticulously glued 2 pages together, creating a hidden pocket. I grabbed a letter opener from my desk and carefully sliced the edge of the pages open. Inside the hollowed-out space, I found a small flat brass key and a faded yellow receipt. I pulled them out and examined the receipt. It was for a private high-security storage facility located on the industrial edge of the city. The rental agreement was signed by Nana Pearl and paid in cash 10 years in advance. This was it. This was where she hid the proof. Just as my fingers closed around the cold brass key, a massive crash echoed through the apartment. The heavy front door splintered and buckled inward, tearing the deadbolt right out of the doorframe. I jumped back, dropping the Bible to the floor. 2 men stepped into my entryway. They were massive, built like linebackers, wearing dark clothes and expressionless faces. They were Trayvon's hired muscle underground enforcers he used to intimidate contractors who asked too many questions. "Trayvon says you have something that belongs to him," the taller thug growled, stepping over the splintered wood of my ruined door. "He says you have a ledger and a key. Hand them over right now and we will leave quietly. Make this difficult, and we are going to break a lot more than your door." I backed away, gripping the brass key tightly in my fist. I was trapped in my home office. The only exit was the window behind my desk, which led out to the fire escape. "I am a wealth advisor," I said, stalling for time as I slowly reached my left hand toward my pocket, where my phone rested. "I do not carry cash in the apartment. You are breaking into the wrong place." The second thug pulled a heavy metal crowbar from his jacket. "We are not here for cash, sweetheart. We are here for the old lady's box. Now give it up!" They lunged forward, rushing into the hallway toward the office. They expected me to scream or cower in the corner. They did not expect me to fight back using the environment I controlled. I pulled my phone from my pocket and activated the Smart Home Emergency Override application. I hit the panic protocol button. Instantly, the apartment transformed into a nightmare for the intruders. A deafening 120 decibel security siren blasted from the hidden ceiling speakers. It was painfully loud, vibrating in my chest and teeth. Simultaneously, the smart lighting system shifted into intruder mode. Blinding tactical strobe lights flashed at high speed, disorienting the visual field and inducing immediate vertigo. The 2 massive men cried out, dropping their hands to cover their ears and shielding their eyes from the relentless, blinding flashes. They stumbled blindly into the hallway walls, completely incapacitated by the sensory overload. I did not wait for them to recover. I grabbed my heavy oak desk chair and kicked it hard into the doorway, creating a barricade for their shins. I spun around, unlatched the heavy office window and shoved it open. The humid city air rushed in. I scrambled over the windowsill and dropped onto the rusted metal grating of the fire escape. I heard one of the men curse loudly as he tripped over the desk chair, crashing to the floor inside the strobe-lit room. I gripped the brass key in my hand and began sprinting down the metal stairs of the fire escape, my heels clanging against the iron. I reached the alleyway below, hitting the pavement running. I did not look back. I had the key. The race to the vault had officially begun, and I was not going to let Trayvon's thugs stop me from exposing the horrific truth. The heavy mahogany doors of my father's office clicked shut behind me, sealing away the toxic echo of his threats. I walked down the plush carpeted hallway of the church administrative wing, my heels biting into the floor with purposeful rhythm. I did not look back. My phone buzzed constantly in my purse, likely Trayvon or my mother hurling more ultimatums, but I ignored it. The battle lines were officially drawn, and I knew exactly what their next move would be. Trayvon and Kiara operated on a playbook of social manipulation. If they could not force me to sign a confession, they would try to destroy my credibility so that no one would believe me when I went to the authorities. They needed to frame me as a disgruntled, unstable spinster who had lost her grip on reality. The next day arrived with a sweltering Atlanta heat that matched the intensity brewing inside me. I dressed in a sharp, tailored emerald green suit, a color that commanded attention and respect. I knew exactly where Kiara would launch her preemptive strike. Every third Thursday of the month, the Black Excellence in Business Women's Networking Association held their upscale luncheon at the heavily guarded Buckhead Country Club. It was a gathering of the city's most influential African-American female entrepreneurs, investors, and socialites. Kiara never missed it. She used the event to parade her fake success and solicit admiration from women who actually worked for their wealth. Today, she was going to use it to assassinate my character. I drove my car through the wrought iron gates of the country club, flashing my membership card to the guard. I parked and walked toward the grand ballroom. The sound of clinking crystal and polite laughter drifted through the polished corridors. I pushed open the double doors and stepped into a room dripping with opulence. Massive floral centerpieces sat on tables covered in crisp white linen, while waitstaff in immaculate uniforms wove through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. I spotted Kiara immediately. She was positioned at a prime center table, holding court with a group of highly influential women, including a local news anchor and the CEO of a prominent real estate firm. Kiara wore a bright yellow designer dress that screamed for attention. I took a seat at a small table just a few yards away, hidden temporarily by a tall floral arrangement. I opened my leather tote bag and pulled out my high-powered tablet. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard. Trayvon thought he was a criminal mastermind by putting his entire illicit financial network in my name to frame me. But his arrogance was his fatal flaw. Because I was the sole legal proprietor of his shell companies, I had master administrative access to every single corporate account. I did not just have my name on the door, I held the digital keys to the kingdom. I navigated to the overarching corporate management portal, a system Trayvon foolishly linked to my primary email address years ago. I clicked into the ledger for Melanin and Silk, Kiara's supposedly elite luxury fashion boutique. From my vantage point, I could hear Kiara's voice pitching higher, cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. She was intentionally projecting so the surrounding tables could hear her tragic tale. "It is just so devastating." Kiara sighed, pressing a manicured hand to her chest in a display of manufactured grief. Nia had a complete mental breakdown yesterday right in our dining room. We are all so worried about her. She actually attacked Trayvon. Physical violence over Nana Pearl's estate. She has always been so bitter about being single and stuck pushing numbers around a cubicle while Trayvon builds his empire. We are looking into getting her committed to a psychiatric facility for her own good. The women at her table gasped, murmuring sympathetic sounds. The news anchor frowned, looking deeply concerned. "I always thought Nia was the quiet, responsible one," she said. "To attack her own brother over money. That is just disgraceful." "Jealousy is a terrible sickness," Kiara agreed, sipping her mimosa and nodding solemnly. "Trayvon does so much for the community with his housing projects, and Nia just wants to tear him down. She even tried to steal a check meant for the church charity fund. Trayvon had to restrain her, and we had to call the police to handle the situation. It is breaking the bishop's heart." I stared at my tablet screen, watching the real-time financial manifests load for Kiara's boutique. I cross-referenced her reported inventory imports with her monthly revenue. The numbers were hilariously sloppy. Trayvon was a terrible criminal, and Kiara was an even worse accomplice. They were using the store as a massive money laundering front, funneling the stolen megachurch tithes through fake retail sales to make the cash look legitimate. I tapped a few more buttons, locking the data on my screen. I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward Kiara's table. The soft, rhythmic click of my heels against the marble floor drew the attention of the women around her. The conversation naturally died down as they noticed my approach. Kiara looked up mid-sip, her fake sympathy instantly vanishing from her face. A flash of genuine panic widened her eyes as she saw me standing there, completely composed and flawlessly dressed. There was no trace of the deranged attacker she had just described. Nia, Kiara stammered, quickly lowering her glass. "What are you doing here? You need to leave. Security will remove you if you cause a scene." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I smiled a cold professional smile that radiated absolute authority. "A mental breakdown, Kiara," I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the quieted ballroom. "Is that the narrative Trayvon told you to spin today? Because if we are going to talk about finances, theft, and mental stability in front of Atlanta's finest businesswomen, I think we should take a closer look at your boutique." Kiara's face flushed a deep, angry red. She stood up, trying to block my path to the table. "I am not doing this with you, Nia. You are sick. You need help. Everyone here knows what you did to your brother." I stepped around her smoothly and placed my tablet right in the center of her table, turning the bright screen so the prominent women around her could see the glaring red spreadsheets. I tapped the display once, bringing the financial summary front and center. Melanin and Silk reported $300,000 in retail sales last month, I stated, projecting my voice perfectly so the surrounding tables could hear every single syllable. That is an incredibly impressive figure for a boutique that only operates 4 days a week and rarely has more than 2 customers in the store at a time. But here's the interesting part, Kiara. I pulled your shipping and receiving manifests. According to the international freight logs and your own supply chain records, your store only imported 20 dresses from your manufacturer in China last month. The silence in the ballroom became absolute. The clinking of silverware stopped. Dozens of highly educated, successful women turned their heads to listen. The women sitting at Kiara's table leaned forward, their eyes darting from my face to the undeniable data glowing on the tablet screen. "So please explain to these brilliant businesswomen how you generated $300,000 in profit selling a grand total of 20 dresses," I challenged, keeping my gaze locked on Kiara's panicked face. "Are your garments woven from solid gold, or are you just laundering the church tithes to hide my brother's crimes?" Kiara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at the news anchor, who was staring at her with profound professional suspicion. The real estate CEO frowned, crossing her arms. Money laundering was not a piece of juicy gossip. It was a serious federal offense, and the math sitting right in front of them painted a very clear picture. "That is a lie!" Kiara finally shrieked, her voice cracking as she desperately tried to snatch the tablet from the table. "Those are fake numbers. She hacked into my system. She is a criminal." I smoothly pulled this tablet out of her reach before her manicured nails could scratch the screen. "I am a licensed forensic wealth advisor, Kiara," I reminded her loudly. "I do not need to hack into anything." Trayvon was arrogant enough to put the overarching corporate limited liability company entirely in my name so he could frame me when the federal agents finally audited the megachurch. "He made me the sole legal owner of your business, which means these are my official corporate records." Murmurs of shock rippled through the ballroom. The elite women of Atlanta were putting the pieces together. The sudden influx of wealth, the flashy cars, the constant boasting. It was all a house of cards built on stolen congregation money. Kiara looked around the room, realizing her social empire was evaporating in real time. The women she had just been trying to impress were now looking at her like she was toxic. "You are going to regret this," Nia, Kiara hissed, leaning in close, her face twisted with pure hatred. "Trayvon will destroy you." While Kiara stood there stammering and issuing empty threats, a waiter nervously approached the table holding a black leather billfold. Kiara had loudly offered to cover the extravagant champagne and caviar tab for her entire group when she first sat down, a desperate attempt to buy their loyalty. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vance," the waiter stammered, looking highly uncomfortable as he held out a black corporate credit card. "There seems to be a problem with your payment method." Kiara snatched the card from his hand, her eyes bulging with outrage. What do you mean there is a problem? Run it again. It is a corporate black card. It has no limit. I did run it again, ma'am, the waiter said, shrinking back from her fierce glare. I ran it 3 times. The bank has declined the transaction. They said the account is frozen. I smiled, tapping the screen of my tablet one final time. I looked directly into Kiara's terrified eyes. By the way, since the LLC is legally in my name and I am responsible for the financial integrity of the accounts, I just froze all your corporate credit cards. I locked the portals, I severed the transfer routes, and I flagged the entire network for suspicious activity. You cannot spend a single dime of that stolen money. Have fun paying for this luncheon, Kiara. Kiara stared at the declined plastic card in her hand. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had no access to the millions. She had no way to pay the massive bill sitting on the table. And she had just been exposed as a fraud in front of the most powerful women in the city. Her face crumpled. She looked around the table at her elite friends, but they all immediately looked away, refusing to make eye contact. No one was going to offer to cover the bill for a suspected money launderer. Kiara was completely alone, isolated, and humiliated. She dropped the useless credit card onto the white tablecloth, grabbed her purse, and practically ran out of the ballroom, leaving her dignity and her reputation shattered on the floor behind her. I calmly retrieved my tablet, placed it back into my leather tote bag, and offered a polite nod to the stunned women sitting at the table. "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, ladies," I said. I turned and walked out of the country club, the battle won, and my focus shifting immediately to the next target. As I reached my car and started the engine, my mind raced ahead. Freezing the accounts and destroying Kiara's social standing was only the first step. I needed the physical proof. I needed the undeniable evidence that would put Trayvon behind bars and clear my name completely before the federal authorities moved in. I pulled out my purse and grabbed the certified check for $160,000 that Nana Pearl had left me. I stared at the memo line again. Proverbs 16:11. I drove out of the country club gates, my tires gripping the asphalt as I headed toward my apartment. A just weight and balance are the Lord's. The words echoed in my head. Nana Pearl had left me a map, and I was going to follow it straight to Trayvon's destruction. The drive back to Midtown felt longer than usual. The traffic on Peachtree Street was crawling, but my mind was moving at warp speed. I kept glancing at the check resting on the passenger seat. Nana Pearl had been the matriarch of our family long before my father ever put on a bishop's collar. She noticed everything. She had spent the last year of her life quietly observing Trayvon's extravagant purchases, his hushed phone calls, and the sudden influx of shady contractors hovering around the church grounds. She knew he was stealing. She just needed a way to ensure I found out before the FBI kicked down my door. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Trayvon had always been ruthless, but tying my name to a federal money laundering scheme crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He was perfectly willing to let me rot in a federal penitentiary for 20 years just so he could keep driving sports cars and pretending to be a real estate mogul. My own parents were willing to sacrifice my freedom to protect their golden boy's reputation. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical blow, but I refused to let it paralyze me. I was not the victim in this story. I was the architect of their downfall. I pulled into my apartment complex garage and parked my car. I needed to find the specific Bible Nana Pearl had gifted me for my college graduation. She had custom ordered it with my name embossed in gold on the cover. I hurried to the elevator, my mind entirely focused on the task ahead. I knew Trayvon would not simply accept defeat after I froze his accounts. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals lashed out. I needed to move fast before he realized what Nana Pearl had actually left me. The elevator dinged and I stepped out into the quiet hallway, ready to decode the final message from the only family member who had actually loved me. I sprinted down the damp alleyway, my breath tearing through my throat in ragged gasps. I could hear the muffled shouts of Trayvon's hired muscle echoing from my open apartment window above, but I did not slow down. My car was useless to me now, sitting in the parking garage where they could easily ambush me. I needed to disappear into the city's veins. I bolted onto Peachtree Street, merging seamlessly into a thick crowd of pedestrians waiting at a crosswalk. I kept my head down, clutching my leather tote bag tightly against my ribs. The brass key and the faded yellow receipt burned like a brand against my palm. I slipped down the concrete steps of the MARTA transit station, swiping my card and boarding the first northbound train just as the doors slid shut. I collapsed into a plastic seat, watching the underground tunnel blur past the window. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystalline and cold. I rode the train for 6 stops before transferring to a local bus route that headed toward the industrial district. The scenery shifted dramatically from the gleaming glass skyscrapers of Midtown to sprawling warehouses and cracked asphalt. I got off at a desolate intersection surrounded by chain-link fences and razor wire. The address on Nana Pearl's receipt led me to a monolithic concrete building labeled Apex Secure Storage. It looked like a fortress designed to withstand a siege. I walked through the heavy glass doors into a sterile, brightly lit lobby. A bored-looking clerk sat behind bulletproof glass. I slid the yellow receipt and my driver's license through the metal slot. He barely glanced at me, scanning the barcode on the receipt. He handed me a temporary access card and pointed toward a reinforced steel door. "Unit 409, he droned. "Take the freight elevator to the basement level." The basement smelled of ozone and industrial cleaner. Rows of identical gray steel doors stretched down a seemingly endless corridor. I found Unit 409 and slid the brass key into the heavy padlock. The lock turned with a satisfying mechanical clunk. I pulled the corrugated metal door upward. The unit was small and windowless, illuminated only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the concrete floor sat a heavy vintage fireproof safe. I knelt beside it. The safe required a 4-digit combination. I closed my eyes, thinking of Nana Pearl. I typed in the month and year of my grandfather's passing. A soft click confirmed my guess. I pulled the heavy door open and let out a shaky breath. Inside lay the meticulous life's work of a woman who refused to turn a blind eye to corruption. There were 3 thick leather-bound ledgers, stacks of printed bank statements, and a sealed envelope with my name written in first. My hands trembled as I unfolded the crisp stationery. "My dearest Nia," the letter began. "If you are reading this, my time has passed, and Trevon's greed has finally consumed him entirely. I always knew you were the only one in this family with the spine to do what is right. Your father and your brother have lost their way. They turned the house of God into a den of thieves. I discovered the offshore accounts 6 months ago when I found a discrepancy in the church outreach fund. Trayvon has been siphoning millions, but he did not act alone. Your father signed the authorization transfers. Jerome knew everything. He used the stolen tithes to quietly settle a massive lawsuit against the ministry last year to protect his precious reputation. Trayvon built the laundering network through Kiara's boutique to wash the rest of the cash. I hid this evidence because Trayvon threatened to have me declared legally incompetent and locked in a facility if I spoke out. I leave this burden to you, my brave girl. Burn their fraudulent empire to the ground." A single tear slipped down my cheek, splashing onto the ink. My own father. The man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday, demanding absolute moral purity from his congregation, was the architect of the theft. He had sold his soul to protect his pride and let his son orchestrate a multi-million-dollar federal crime. The sorrow instantly hardened into a rage so intense it physically ached. I wiped my face and reached for the ledgers. As a forensic accountant, I had seen sloppy fraud before, but the arrogance displayed in these books was staggering. Nana Pearl had documented everything. She had traced the routing numbers from the church donation kiosks directly to Trevon's fake construction LLCs. There were printed emails between Trevon and an offshore account manager explicitly discussing the transfer limits required to avoid triggering federal banking alerts. There were property deeds for luxury condos purchased in cash under Kiara's maiden name. It was an airtight, irrefutable paper trail. Trayvon had thought he was invincible because he was the bishop's son. He had no idea his grandmother had been quietly building a federal indictment against him from her armchair. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every single page of the ledgers and bank statements. I uploaded the files directly to a secure encrypted cloud server I used for my highest tier clients. Physical evidence could be stolen or destroyed, but digital copies spread across multiple decentralized servers were permanent. I was packing the heavy ledgers into my tote bag when my phone screen lit up with an emergency news alert. The notification was from a local Atlanta news station app. I tapped it, and a live video feed filled my screen. The broadcast was coming directly from the main sanctuary of Vance Family Ministries. The massive room was packed with reporters, congregation members, and church elders. On the grand stage stood my father, Bishop Jerome, looking incredibly solemn. Beside him stood Traven, favoring his bruised leg, and Kiara dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. My mother Yvonne stood slightly behind them, playing the role of the devastated matriarch. "We have gathered you here today with heavy hearts," my father intoned into the microphone, his deep baritone echoing through the cavernous sanctuary. The devil works in insidious ways, often targeting those closest to us. It is with profound sorrow that I must announce the immediate suspension of my daughter Nia Vance from all church activities and family enterprises. I watched the screen, my grip tightening on my phone. They were actually doing it. They were launching the preemptive strike. Over the past few months, we have discovered severe financial irregularities within the church. Charity funds. My father continued, shaking his head sorrowfully. Evidence has come to light that Nia, using her professional skills as a wealth advisor, has been systematically embezzling tithes meant for the community housing initiative. When her brother Traven confronted her yesterday, she suffered a violent mental break and attacked him. We have contacted the authorities and are cooperating fully with an impending investigation. We ask for your prayers for Nia's troubled soul. Trevon stepped up to the microphone, his face a mask of practiced grief. "I tried to save her," he lied smoothly. "I tried to get her psychiatric help, but the greed had completely taken over her mind. She even attempted to steal a physical check from my home office today before fleeing. We love her, but we must protect the integrity of this ministry." I hit the power button on my phone, plunging the screen into darkness. The sheer audacity of their lie was breathtaking. They were using a live press conference to formally accuse me of their own crimes, hoping to discredit my reputation so thoroughly that the FBI would view me as an unstable, vindictive suspect rather than a whistleblower. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I was hiding in an alleyway, terrified and defeated. I zipped my tote bag shut, securing the ledgers and Nana Pearl's letter inside. I slung the heavy bag over my shoulder. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to use the megachurch as their shield. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I walked out of the storage unit and marched back to the freight elevator. I dialed a number I had memorized from my corporate compliance training. It was the direct, secure line to Special Agent Reynolds at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit in Atlanta. I had worked with him 2 years ago on a routine portfolio audit for a client. "Reynolds," the voice answered sharply. "Agent Reynolds, this is Nia Vance," I said, my voice echoing in the empty concrete hallway. "I need you to dispatch a federal strike team to the Vance Family Ministries campus immediately. I have absolute physical and digital proof of a $6 million money laundering syndicate operating out of the church executive offices. The primary suspects are Bishop Jerome Vance and Trayvon Vance." There was a sharp pause on the line. "Nia Vance, your brother just accused you of embezzlement on live television." "My brother is currently committing perjury on live television," I replied coolly. "I have the master ledgers, Agent Reynolds. I have the offshore routing logs, the fake inventory manifests, and a signed confession letter from the late Pearl Vance outlining the entire operation. I am transmitting the encrypted cloud link to your secure email right now." I heard the rapid clacking of a keyboard through the phone receiver. A moment later, Agent Reynolds let out a low whistle. "My God, he actually routed church funds through a boutique in Buckhead. This is a federal slam dunk. Where are you right now?" "I am heading to the church," I stated, stepping out of the elevator and walking briskly through the lobby. "I am going to walk right into that press conference and face them. Have your team ready at the doors. I am going to make sure they confess in front of the entire congregation before you put the handcuffs on them." "Do not do anything reckless," Nia, Agent Reynolds warned. "Agent Reynolds, we are mobilizing a unit now. Just keep them talking." I ended the call and walked out into the sweltering evening air. I hailed another rideshare, giving the driver the address of the megachurch. The sun was beginning to set, casting a blood-red glow across the Atlanta skyline. My family had built an empire on lies, manipulation, and theft. They had used my name, my credit, and my professional licenses to shield themselves from consequence. They had expected me to fold. They had expected the quiet, obedient daughter to take the fall and disappear into the shadows. I stared out the car window as the massive glass spires of the Vance Family Ministries campus came into view. I reached into my bag and touched the leather cover of Nana Pearl's ledger. I was not the obedient daughter anymore. I was the executioner, and I was about to deliver their final judgment. I darted out of the alley and blended instantly into the crowded sidewalk of Midtown Atlanta. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was utterly clear. I kept my head down, sliding my sunglasses over my eyes and pulling my tailored jacket tight against the evening chill. I knew Trevon's goons would be scouring the immediate blocks within minutes. My car was sitting in the secure garage, but retrieving it was a death trap. Instead, I flagged down a passing yellow cab, tossing a $50 bill into the front seat before the driver could even ask for my destination. I gave him the address from Nana Pearl's faded receipt. The driver nodded and merged aggressively into the heavy rush hour traffic. I sank back against the worn leather seat, forcing my breathing to slow. The brass key burned in my palm, a tiny, jagged piece of metal that held the power to topple a $6 million empire. I watched the glittering skyline of Buckhead fade in the rearview mirror, replaced by the gritty, sprawling industrial parks on the outer edge of the city. Trevon had underestimated me his entire life. He thought I was just the quiet sister, the diligent wealth advisor, who would roll over the moment our parents applied pressure. He thought I would cower when he sent muscle to my home. He was wrong. The cab pulled up to a monolithic concrete building surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. A faded sign read, "Apex Secure Storage." It was desolate, intimidating, and completely off the grid, exactly the kind of place Nana Pearl would choose to hide evidence against the most powerful megachurch in Georgia. I tipped the driver, keeping the rest of my cash, and stepped out into the humid air. The facility lobby was stark lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs. A bored-looking security guard sat behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass. I approached the counter and slid my driver's license and Nana Pearl's yellow receipt through the metal slot. He barely glanced at me, typing the confirmation number into his outdated computer. He slid a temporary magnetic access card back through the slot along with my license. "You are looking for Building C, basement level locker 409, he droned, pointing a lazy finger toward a heavy steel door. I swiped the card, and the door buzzed open with a heavy metallic clunk. The air in the basement was stale, smelling of ozone and old dust. Long rows of identical gray metal lockers stretched down the seemingly endless corridor. I walked briskly, my heels echoing sharply against the concrete floor. The silence was oppressive, but it fueled my determination. I found aisle 4 and turned the corner, counting the painted numbers on the steel doors until I stood directly in front of 409. My hands shook slightly as I inserted the small brass key into the heavy padlock, securing the locker. It turned with a satisfying snap. I pulled the heavy corrugated metal door upward. It shrieked in protest, sliding along the rusted tracks. Inside the narrow space sat a single object, a heavy vintage fireproof lockbox. I knelt on the cold concrete and pulled the box toward me. The latch was unsecured. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay the meticulous lifework of a woman who refused to turn a blind eye to corruption. There were 3 thick leather-bound ledgers, stacks of printed bank statements, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Nana Pearl's elegant cursive. I did not have time to read the letter now. I saw exactly what I needed. Nana Pearl had meticulously traced the routing numbers from the church donation kiosks directly to Trevon's Fake Construction, LLCs. There were printed emails, property deeds, and offshore account numbers. It was an airtight, irrefutable paper trail. I packed the heavy ledgers and files into my leather tote bag, zipping it shut with absolute finality. I slung the heavy bag over my shoulder, ready to walk out of this concrete bunker and straight to the FBI field office. Well, well, well. Look at the little thief trying to steal from her own family. The voice echoed down the corridor, dripping with venom. I froze, my hand still resting on the metal handle of the locker door. I turned slowly. Trayvon stood at the end of the aisle, blocking the only exit. He had bypassed the front desk security, likely flashing a stack of $100 bills or using his status as a prominent community leader to bully his way past the guard. He looked nothing like the polished, charismatic developer who stood on the church stage every Sunday. His bespoke suit was rumpled, his tie was pulled loose, and his face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He took a slow, menacing step forward. "You really thought you could outsmart me, Naya?" He sneered, his voice echoing off the metal doors. "You thought you could freeze Kiara's cards, humiliate my wife in public, and just walk away? My guys called me the second you went out the window. It did not take a genius to figure out you were heading to the only place that old bat kept her secrets." I stood up tall, squaring my shoulders. "The old bat, as you call her, was the only one in our family." With a shred of integrity, I shot back, my voice ringing clear and steady in the dim hallway. "She knew exactly what you were doing, Trayvon. She knew you were stealing from the congregation to fund your pathetic attempt at building a real estate empire." Trayvon laughed, a harsh, grating sound that held no humor. "You think anyone is going to care what a senile old woman wrote down in some notebooks? You think anyone is going to believe you? Mom and Dad are already drafting a public statement about your mental breakdown. By tomorrow morning, the entire city will know that you are a severely disturbed woman who embezzled church funds and attacked her own brother." He took another step closer, closing the distance between us. The heavy scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the stale air of the basement. He dropped the holy righteous act entirely. The mask slipped, revealing the vicious, greedy coward underneath. "You are nothing, Nia," he spat, his eyes dark and furious. "Mom and Dad always knew you were a loser. Give me the ledger, or I will make sure you do not walk out of here." He reached inside his tailored jacket, his intent absolutely clear. He was cornered, desperate, and willing to do whatever it took to protect his stolen millions. He expected me to panic. He expected the sister who had silently endured years of emotional abuse and financial exploitation to finally submit to his authority. I did not back away. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I held it up the screen facing him. The red recording light was blinking steadily. I tapped a single button on the screen. "I am not just recording, Trayvon," I stated, my voice radiating absolute icy calm. "I am live streaming. This video and audio feed is currently transmitting directly to my private secure server, a server you cannot access. A server that is programmed to automatically forward this entire unedited broadcast to Special Agent Reynolds at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit if I do not enter a cancellation code within the next 10 minutes. Trayvon stopped dead in his tracks. His hand froze inside his jacket. His eyes locked onto the glowing red indicator on my screen. "Take one step, Trayvon," I commanded, my voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "And this goes straight to the FBI. You think you are untouchable, but you are just a coward hiding behind a pulpit." I watched the realization wash over his face. He looked at the phone, then at the heavy tote bag slung over my shoulder. He knew he was beaten. If he touched me, the FBI would have a live broadcast of an assault to add to the money laundering charges. The golden boy of Vance Family Ministries was completely trapped by his own hubris. He slowly raised his hands, backing away and pressing his shoulders against the cold metal lockers. His chest heaved with suppressed rage, but he did not utter a single word. I kept the phone raised, the camera focused squarely on his defeated face. I walked forward, my heels clicking rhythmically against the concrete floor. I did not hurry. I walked with the deliberate, measured pace of a woman who had just reclaimed her entire life. I walked right past him, the heavy bag of evidence secure against my side, leaving my brother standing in the shadows of the basement. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the storage facility and stepped out into the thick, humid night. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to slow. I did not run. Running attracts attention. I walked with brutal purpose down the cracked asphalt of the industrial park until I reached the main thoroughfare. I flagged down a passing taxi, sliding into the back seat and handing the driver a $100 bill. I gave him the address of an anonymous high-rise hotel in downtown Atlanta, a place where corporate executives came and went without anyone asking questions. I needed a secure environment, a war room, where I could dissect the monster my brother had become. The hotel room was sterile and silent, overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city. I locked the heavy wooden door, engaged the deadbolt, and slid the security chain into place. I pulled the blackout curtains tightly together, shutting out the neon glow of the skyline. I dropped my heavy leather tote bag onto the glass desk and took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to go to work. I was not just a betrayed sister anymore. I was a forensic wealth advisor, and I had a crime scene to dismantle. I opened the fireproof lockbox and spread the contents across the desk. Nana Pearl's handwritten ledgers smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Beside them sat a sleek silver flash drive. I powered up my encrypted laptop, bypassing the standard operating system and booting directly into a secure offline environment. I inserted the flash drive. The screen flickered, bringing up a highly organized directory of folders. Nana Pearl had not just been taking notes. She had hired someone or used her own formidable intelligence to scrape the hidden servers of Vance Family Ministries. I opened the first folder and began to decode the financial web. The initial documents confirmed exactly what I had already suspected. Trayvon had set up a classic layering scheme. He was skimming 20% off the top of every major church donation, routing the cash through a maze of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and then funneling it back into the local economy through Kiara's luxury boutique. It was a textbook placement and integration strategy. He was washing dirty church money and turning it into clean real estate investments. But as I dug deeper into the spreadsheets, something did not align. The cash flow from the boutique and the embezzled tithes amounted to roughly $6 million. But Trayvon's recent real estate acquisitions, the luxury high-rises, the commercial plots, the massive tracts of land out in the suburbs, required capital far exceeding that amount. He was spending money he simply did not have. I frowned, my eyes darting across the digital columns. As a fiduciary, I knew how to follow the invisible strings of debt. Trayvon had to be borrowing massive amounts of institutional capital. But no legitimate bank would underwrite those kinds of loans without solid collateral. I opened a subfolder labeled Vance Community Trust. My blood ran completely cold as the documents loaded onto my screen. Trayvon had not just stolen cash from the offering plates. He had orchestrated a predatory real estate scam of horrifying proportions. 2 years ago, my father, Bishop Jerome, had stood at the pulpit and preached about a new initiative. He called it the Vance Legacy Protection Program. He urged the elderly members of the congregation, the pioneers who had built the church with their bare hands, to transfer their property deeds into a church-managed trust. He promised them tax protection. He promised them that the church would safeguard their generational wealth, preventing the government from taking their homes when they passed away. They trusted their pastor, they trusted their spiritual father, and they signed the papers. I scrolled through the digitized legal documents, my stomach churning with pure nausea. There were over 50 residential property deeds sitting inside the Vance Community Trust. I recognized the names. Sister Washington, who had taught my Sunday school classes for a decade. Deacon Morris, who used to fix the neighborhood kids' bicycles for free. Mother Jenkins, who baked pies for every church bake sale. And right there at the top of the list was Pearl Vance, my grandmother. Trayvon had taken those 50 deeds and used them as collateral to secure a $20 million loan from a shadow private equity firm called Apex Capital. It was an illicit syndicate known for funding high-risk offshore developments with brutal repayment terms. Trayvon had leveraged the homes of 50 elderly black families to bankroll his fake empire. I pulled up the loan amortization schedule and felt the breath leave my lungs. Trayvon was not making the payments. The loan was severely delinquent. Apex Capital had issued a final notice of default 48 hours ago. If the $20 million balloon payment was not satisfied by the end of the month, the private equity firm would execute the collateral clause. They would seize the properties. 50 families, including my own grandmother, would be legally evicted and thrown out onto the street. Everything they had worked for their entire lives stolen and liquidated by their pastor's son. The horrific truth settled over me like a suffocating blanket. This was never just about greed. This was an act of profound structural violence against the most vulnerable people in our community. I reached for Nana Pearl's handwritten letter. Her elegant script now looked like a desperate warning from beyond the grave. She had figured it out. She had seen the transfer documents in Traven's home office and realized the magnitude of his betrayal. She knew he had mortgaged the entire community to feed his ego. She was gathering this evidence to take it straight to the federal authorities to expose her own grandson and save the congregation. But her sudden death had stopped her. The doctors called it a massive cardiac event. But looking at the explosive evidence on my desk, a dark, terrifying suspicion took root in my mind. The timing was too perfect. Trayvon had everything to lose. Had he confronted her? Had the stress of his betrayal caused her heart to fail, or had he actively silenced her to protect his $20 million secret? I pushed the thought away, refusing to let grief cloud my analytical focus. Nana Pearl had known she was in danger. That was why she wrote the check. She knew Trayvon would freeze the accounts and try to frame me. The check was a dead man's switch designed to force me to the bank, force me to see the offshore routing numbers, and lead me directly to this vault. I grabbed my phone to call Agent Reynolds at the FBI. I had the ultimate smoking gun, but before I could dial, a breaking news alert flashed across my screen. It was a live broadcast from the local Atlanta news station. I tapped the notification and the video feed filled my phone. The anchor was standing outside the gleaming glass doors of the Buckhead Grand Hotel. Tomorrow night, the city of Atlanta will witness one of the most highly anticipated philanthropic events of the decade, the reporter announced with a practiced smile. Bishop Jerome Vance and his son Trayvon Vance will host the Legacy Gala, a black tie event aimed at securing the final round of investments for their massive community center project. The Vance family is expecting to raise upward of $10 million in a single evening from prominent local leaders and devoted parishioners. The broadcast cut to a pre-recorded interview with Trayvon. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, smiling humbly into the camera. "This gala is about securing our future," Trayvon lied smoothly. "We are asking our community to dig deep to pledge their support, so we can finally break ground on a center that will uplift our youth for generations to come." I stared at his smiling face, the pieces of his endgame locking together with terrifying precision. There was no community center. There never had been. Trayvon was completely underwater with Apex Capital, and he knew the default was imminent. He knew the FBI was likely circling the money laundering operation. His empire was collapsing, and he needed an exit strategy. The Legacy Gala was not a charity event. It was his final massive cash grab. He was going to pack that ballroom with wealthy donors, convince them to write multi-million-dollar checks for a phantom building project, and then he was going to vanish. I quickly hacked into the church's travel itinerary portal using my administrative credentials. My suspicions were confirmed instantly. Trayvon had chartered a private jet scheduled to depart from a small executive airstrip at 2 a.m. tomorrow night, right after the gala concluded. The flight plan was registered for a non-extradition country in South America. He had booked one-way tickets for himself, Kiara, and my parents. They were going to take the gala money, abandon the church, and skip the country. They were going to leave me behind to face the federal indictments for the money laundering scheme that carried my name. And worse, they were going to leave 50 innocent families to be thrown out of their homes when the private equity firms seized the deeds. A cold, calculating fury washed over me, replacing the shock and the sorrow. Trayvon thought he had won. He thought he could smear my name on television, steal from the most vulnerable people in our city, and fly off into the sunset. He thought he was untouchable because he hid behind a pulpit and a tailored suit. I slowly closed my laptop and packed the ledgers back into my tote bag. I walked over to the hotel window and looked out at the glittering Atlanta skyline. I was not going to wait for the FBI to sort through the paperwork. I was not going to let Trayvon play the victim and quietly escape the country. I was going to tear his mask off in front of the entire city. Tomorrow night, the elite of Atlanta and the devoted congregation of Vance Family Ministries would gather in their finest clothes to celebrate a lie. I picked up my phone and dialed my most trusted contact, a fiercely loyal investigative journalist who had been trying to expose the megachurch's finances for years. It was time to go on the offensive. Trayvon wanted a spectacular gala. I was going to give him a finale he would never forget. The battle for my family was over. The war for justice had just begun. The heavy steel doors of the freight elevator hissed shut, cutting off Trayvon's furious gaze. I did not exhale until the elevator began its slow ascent to the ground floor. My pulse drummed a frantic rhythm in my ears, but my hands remained completely steady. I had won the standoff, but I knew cornered rats were the most dangerous animals on Earth. Trayvon would not simply accept defeat. He would mobilize his security team and try to intercept me before I could analyze what I had just taken. I bypassed the main lobby, entirely opting for the emergency fire exit that spilled out into a narrow service alley behind the facility. The humid night air wrapped around me as I sprinted toward the main road. I needed to vanish. I flagged down a passing taxi, slipping a crisp $100 bill through the partition before the driver could even ask for a destination. I gave him the address of an anonymous luxury hotel in the heart of downtown Atlanta. It was a place frequented by transient executives and diplomats, a fortress where privacy was guaranteed and questions were never asked. I paid for the room in cash using an alias I kept for emergencies and rode the glass elevator to the 22nd floor. The room was immaculate and sterile, devoid of any personality. I locked the heavy wooden door, engaged the deadbolt, and slid the brass security chain into place. I pulled the blackout curtains tightly together, completely shutting out the neon glow of the city skyline. I dropped my leather tote bag onto the polished glass desk and took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to go to work. I was no longer just a betrayed sister fleeing in the night. I was a licensed forensic wealth advisor, and I had a sprawling financial crime scene to dismantle. I opened the heavy fireproof lockbox and spread its contents across the cool glass surface of the desk. Nana Pearl's handwritten ledgers smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, a sharp contrast to the cold digital reality of the sleek silver flash drive resting beside them. I powered up my encrypted laptop, bypassing the standard operating system and booting directly into a secure offline environment. I inserted the flash drive. The screen flickered instantly, bringing up a highly organized directory of folders. Nana Pearl had not just been taking casual notes. She had hired a professional or utilized her own formidable intellect to quietly scrape the hidden servers of Vance Family Ministries. I opened the first folder and began to untangle the financial web. The initial documents confirmed exactly what I had already suspected. Trayvon had set up a classic layering scheme. He was skimming 20% off the top of every major church donation, routing the cash through a maze of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and then funneling it back into the local economy through Kiara's luxury boutique. It was a textbook placement and integration strategy designed to wash dirty church money and turn it into clean real estate investments. But as I dug deeper into the intricate spreadsheets, something did not align. The math was fundamentally broken. The cash flow from the boutique and the embezzled tithes amounted to roughly $6 million over the past 3 years. However, Trayvon's recent real estate acquisitions, the luxury high-rises, the commercial plots, the massive tracts of land out in the wealthy suburbs required capital far exceeding that amount. He was spending money he simply did not have. I frowned, my eyes darting across the digital columns, highlighting discrepancies in bright red. As a fiduciary, I knew how to follow the invisible strings of debt. Trayvon had to be borrowing massive amounts of institutional capital to fund this lifestyle, but no legitimate bank would underwrite those kinds of exorbitant loans without solid collateral. And the church properties themselves were heavily mortgaged, rendering them useless for new lines of credit. I leaned closer to the screen, my forensic instincts screaming that I was missing the foundation of the entire operation. He was getting the money from somewhere else. I clicked into a restricted subfolder labeled Vance Community Trust. My blood ran completely cold as the PDF documents loaded onto my glowing screen. Trayvon had not just stolen cash from the offering plates. He had orchestrated a predatory real estate scam of horrifying proportions. 2 years ago, my father, Bishop Jerome, had stood at the pulpit and preached passionately about a brand new initiative. He called it the Vance Legacy Protection Program. He urged the elderly members of our congregation, the pioneers who had built the church with their bare hands, to transfer their property deeds into a church-managed trust. He promised them absolute tax protection. He promised them that the church would safeguard their generational wealth, preventing the government or greedy developers from taking their homes when they passed away. They trusted their pastor. They trusted their spiritual father. And they signed the papers, blindly handing over their most valuable assets. I scrolled through the digitized legal documents, my stomach churning with pure nausea. There were over 50 residential property deeds sitting inside the Vance Community Trust. I recognized the names instantly. Sister Washington, who had taught my Sunday school classes for a decade. Deacon Morris, who used to fix the neighborhood kids' bicycles for free. Mother Jenkins, who baked sweet potato pies for every church bake sale. And right there, at the very top of the list, was Pearl Vance, my own grandmother. Trayvon had taken those 50 deeds and maliciously used them as collateral to secure a $20 million loan. He did not go to a standard bank. He went to a shadow private equity firm called Apex Capital. It was an illicit syndicate known for funding high-risk offshore developments with brutal, unforgiving repayment terms. Trayvon had leveraged the homes of 50 elderly black families to bankroll his fake empire. I pulled up the loan amortization schedule and felt the breath completely leave my lungs. Trayvon was not making the payments. The loan was severely delinquent. Apex Capital had issued a final notice of default 48 hours ago. If the $20 million balloon payment was not satisfied by the end of the month, the private equity firm would immediately execute the collateral clause. They would seize the properties. 50 families, including my own grandmother, would be legally evicted and thrown out onto the street. Everything they had worked for their entire lives stolen and liquidated by their pastor's son. This was never just about greed or buying flashy cars. This was an act of profound structural violence against the most vulnerable people in our community. I reached for Nana Pearl's handwritten letter, her elegant script now looking like a desperate warning from beyond the grave. She had figured it out. She had seen the trust transfer documents in Trayvon's home office and realized the catastrophic magnitude of his betrayal. She knew he had mortgaged the entire community to feed his insatiable ego. She was meticulously gathering this evidence to take it straight to the federal authorities to expose her own grandson and save the congregation from absolute ruin. But her sudden death had stopped her cold. The doctors called it a massive cardiac event, but looking at the explosive evidence on my desk, a dark, terrifying suspicion took root in my mind. The timing was entirely too perfect. Trayvon had everything to lose. Had he confronted her? Had the stress of his betrayal caused her heart to fail? Or had he actively silenced her to protect his $20 million secret? I pushed the horrific thought away, refusing to let grief cloud my analytical focus. Nana Pearl had known she was in grave danger. That was exactly why she wrote the certified check. She knew Trayvon would freeze the accounts and try to frame me. The check was a brilliant dead man switch designed to force me to the bank, force me to see the offshore routing numbers, and lead me directly to this hidden vault. I grabbed my phone to call Agent Reynolds at the FBI, but a breaking news alert flashed across my screen. It was a live broadcast from the local Atlanta news station. I tapped the notification, and the video feed filled my screen. The anchor was standing outside the gleaming glass doors of the Buckhead Grand Hotel. Tomorrow night, the city of Atlanta will witness one of the most highly anticipated philanthropic events of the decade, the reporter announced with a practiced smile. Bishop Jerome Vance and his son Trayvon Vance will host the Legacy Gala, a black tie event aimed at securing the final round of investments for their massive community center project. The Vance family is expecting to raise upward of $10 million in a single evening from prominent local leaders and devoted parishioners. The broadcast cut to a pre-recorded interview with Trayvon wearing a bespoke tuxedo and smiling humbly into the camera. "This gala is about securing our future," Trayvon lied smoothly. We are asking our community to dig deep to pledge their support so we can finally break ground on a center that will uplift our youth for generations to come. I stared at his smiling face, the pieces of his endgame locking together with terrifying precision. There was no community center. There never had been. Trayvon was completely underwater with Apex Capital, and he knew the default was imminent. His empire was collapsing, and he needed an immediate exit strategy. The Legacy Gala was not a charity event. It was his final massive exit scam. He was going to pack that ballroom with wealthy donors, convince them to write multi-million-dollar checks for a phantom building project, and then he was going to vanish. I quickly hacked into the church travel itinerary portal using my administrative credentials. My suspicions were confirmed instantly. Trayvon had chartered a private executive jet scheduled to depart from a small airstrip at 2 a.m. tomorrow night, right after the gala concluded. The flight plan was registered for a non-extradition country in South America. He had booked one-way tickets for himself, Kiara, and my parents. They were going to take the gala money, abandon the church, and skip the country, leaving 50 innocent families to be thrown out of their homes. A cold, calculating fury washed over me. I was not going to let him escape. I was going to tear his mask off in front of the entire city. The Buckhead Grand Hotel Ballroom was a masterclass in manufactured opulence. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in heavy black velvet. Waitstaff in immaculate white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and beluga caviar. The elite of Atlanta were all here: local politicians, real estate moguls, and the wealthiest members of the Vance Family Ministries congregation. They were here to be seen, to rub shoulders, and most importantly, to write massive checks. At the center of the room, my father, Bishop Jerome, and my mother, Yvonne, held court. My mother wore a shimmering sapphire gown, soaking in the admiration of the women around her, while my father laughed heartily at a joke told by a city councilman. Trayvon and Kiara worked the opposite side of the ballroom, playing the perfect power couple. Trayvon smiled, his teeth gleaming white against his dark skin, while Kiara clung to his arm, dripping in diamonds paid for by the stolen equity of elderly parishioners. It was a sickening display of wealth built on the backs of the vulnerable. I stepped through the gilded double doors of the ballroom, feeling the heavy weight of the flash drive in my clutch. I wore a floor-length crimson gown with a plunging neckline and a razor-sharp silhouette. I looked stunning, I looked powerful, and I was completely unbothered by the stares I immediately drew. Two burly security guards in dark suits moved to block my path, holding up their scanners. I did not slow down. I simply raised my phone, displaying a unique QR code. The scanner beeped a pleasant green. What Trayvon did not realize when he set up this elaborate sham was that the gala was being funded and organized through one of his primary shell companies, the exact same shell company where he had foolishly listed me as the sole managing director. I had not just generated a VIP barcode, I had generated an all-access master pass. The guards stepped aside instantly, their heads bowing in deference to my digital authority. I glided into the room, snatching a flute of champagne from a passing tray. It only took 30 seconds for the family panic to set in. I saw my mother spot me first. Her eyes widened in absolute horror, her manicured hand flying to her throat. She whispered frantically to my father, who turned his face draining of color. Yvonne excused herself from her circle of admirers and marched toward me. For the cameras and the surrounding guests, she wore a tight, brilliant smile, but as she closed the distance, her eyes were pure venom. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging painfully into my skin. "Security is on the way to throw you in the gutter where you belong," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. "You have some nerve showing your face here after what you did to your brother. Trayvon is going to ruin you, Nia." I calmly pried her fingers off my arm and took a slow sip of my champagne. "Throw me out and I pull the fire alarm right now," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Then I will stand in the lobby and scream to every single one of these investors that your son's limited liability company is currently under active federal investigation." My mother's fake smile faltered, a genuine flicker of terror breaking through the Botox. She looked at my calm expression and realized I was not bluffing. I held all the cards and she was entirely powerless. Smile for the cameras. Mom, I commanded, lifting my glass in a mock toast. We are playing my game tonight. Go back to your table and watch the show. I left her standing there, paralyzed by fear, and moved toward the back of the ballroom, slipping into the shadows near the service corridor. On the main stage, the lights dimmed, and a dramatic instrumental track began to play. The crowd fell silent as Trayvon stepped up to the acrylic podium, adjusting his tuxedo jacket. Kiara stood a few feet behind him, beaming with manufactured pride. Two men in suits wheeled out a massive oversized ceremonial check made out to the Vance Community Center for a staggering $10 million. Thank you, Trayvon said, leaning into the microphone, his voice thick with fake emotion. Thank you to everyone in this room. Tonight is not just about a building. Tonight is about family faith and building Black wealth. It is about ensuring our community has a safe haven for generations to come. When I look out at all of you, I see the future. I see the legacy we are building together. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Some people even stood to their feet. It was a sickeningly sweet performance, a masterclass in manipulation. Trayvon was literally soaking up the adoration of the very people he was preparing to abandon and defraud. He spoke of lifting up the community while secretly holding the foreclosure papers that would destroy 50 Black families by the end of the month. I did not stick around to listen to the rest of his lies. I slipped through the service doors and hurried down a dark, narrow hallway toward the AV control room. I knew exactly where it was, having reviewed the hotel's floor plans online earlier that afternoon. I peeked through the small glass window of the heavy door. A single technician sat at a massive soundboard wearing oversized headphones and eating a sandwich. I opened the door, stepped inside, and locked the deadbolt behind me. The technician spun around, his eyes wide with surprise. "Hey, you are not supposed to be in here," he said, reaching for his headset. I flashed my phone screen, displaying the master corporate profile that proved I was the legal director of the company hosting the event. "I am the executive producer," I said in my most authoritative corporate tone. "We have a last-minute change to the presentation. The board wants a new tribute video played immediately before the check presentation. I need you to step outside and run an audio check in the main hall." He hesitated, but my confident demeanor and the official-looking documents on my screen did the trick. He nodded, grabbed his radio, and slipped out the door. The moment it clicked shut, I jammed a heavy metal chair under the door handle, barricading it completely. I turned to the main control console. A complex array of monitors displayed the live feed of Trayvon on stage. I pulled Nana Pearl's silver flash drive from my clutch and plugged it directly into the master server tower. I bypassed the hotel firewall, bringing up the folders I had meticulously organized in my hotel room. My fingers flew across the keyboard, mapping the visual outputs to the massive screens in the ballroom and routing the audio feed directly through my control panel. On the monitors, I watched Trayvon wiping a fake tear from his eye as he reached out to accept the giant ceremonial check from the city councilman. The crowd was cheering loudly. My parents were standing at their front row table, clapping with pride, though my mother's eyes darted nervously around the room looking for me. I selected the master presentation file and hit override. Inside the ballroom, the cheerful background music abruptly cut off. A loud electronic screech echoed through the massive speakers, silencing the crowd instantly. The enormous LED screens spanning the entire back wall of the stage flashed a violent, blinding red. The glowing Vance Family Ministries logo vanished. In its place, a massive, highly detailed financial flowchart appeared. At the top of the screen, in bold black letters, was the name of Trayvon's shell company. Bright red arrows connected the church charity accounts directly to the offshore Cayman Island routing numbers. Beside the flowchart, digitized copies of the forged property deeds materialized. The names of the 50 elderly parishioners whose homes had been stolen were displayed in massive font for the entire room to see. The $20 million loan documents from Apex Capital flashed next, highlighting the imminent default and the brutal foreclosure terms. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Gasps of horror and confusion rippled through the crowd. Investors pointed at the screens, their faces twisting with shock. I watched Trayvon on the monitor. He dropped the giant check, letting it clatter loudly to the stage floor. He turned around to look at the screens and the color drained completely from his face. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. Kiara stumbled backward, covering her mouth in shock. My father slumped into his chair, grabbing his chest, while my mother stared at the screens in paralyzed horror. They were exposed. The entire fraudulent empire was laid bare under the bright stadium lights. There was nowhere to hide and no sermon powerful enough to talk their way out of this. I leaned over the audio console and pulled the main microphone toward me. I flipped the channel switch, overriding Trayvon's stage mic and connecting my voice directly to the primary sound system. "Good evening, everyone." My voice echoed through the ballroom speakers, perfectly calm and authoritative. The panic in the room instantly ceased, replaced by a stunned, breathless silence. As the chief financial officer of Trayvon Shell Company, a title he generously forced upon me, I thought it was time we gave the investors a transparent look at where their money is actually going. I released the switch on the audio console and picked up a spare wireless microphone resting on the technician's desk. I pushed the heavy metal chair away from the door handle, unbolted the lock, and stepped out of the claustrophobic AV room. I walked out onto the sweeping mezzanine balcony that overlooked the grand ballroom. Below me, the scene was a masterpiece of absolute panic. The massive LED screens continued to blare their crimson warning, casting a harsh red light over the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of Atlanta's elite. I began my descent down the main marble staircase. My crimson gown trailed behind me like spilled blood on the white stone. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate cadence of an executioner who had already won the war. Every eye in the cavernous room turned toward me. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a deafening roar of confusion and outrage, but I kept my gaze locked entirely on the stage. Trayvon was losing his mind. The polished, charismatic pastor who had just spoken so eloquently about faith and family was completely gone. In his place stood a cornered, terrified fraud. His bespoke tuxedo jacket hung awkwardly on his frame as he frantically slammed his hand against the acrylic podium. "She is crazy!" Trayvon screamed, his voice cracking without the amplification of the microphone. He pointed a shaking finger at me as I continued my slow descent. "Do not listen to her. She is a disgruntled ex-employee. She is having a mental breakdown. Someone get security in here right now. Cut the power." I said, "Cut the damn screens." He waved frantically at the security guards lining the perimeter of the room. The burly men in dark suits stepped forward, but they immediately froze. They looked at Trayvon on the stage, and then they looked up at the massive screens displaying my name as the sole executive director of the LLC paying their invoices. They were hired muscle, and they knew better than to physically assault the woman who held the purse strings. They stepped back, folding their hands in front of them and refusing to intervene. My mother broke away from her table at the front of the stage. Yvonne rushed toward the bottom of the staircase, her sapphire gown catching the red light of the screens. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Nia, stop this right now," she hissed up at me, her voice trembling with the effort of keeping her volume low. "You are destroying your brother. You are destroying this family. Get back up those stairs and turn those screens off before I call the police myself." I reached the final marble step and stopped, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small. "Call them," I said, my voice carrying clearly without the microphone. "Call the police, Mom. I am sure the federal investigators would love to speak with you about the offshore accounts routing through your personal charity foundation." Yvonne's mouth snapped shut. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. She took a stumbling step backward, bumping into my father, who had just arrived beside her. Bishop Jerome Vance, the great spiritual leader of Atlanta, looked like he was suffocating. He clutched his chest, his eyes darting wildly between the forged property deeds on the screen and his golden child sweating on the stage. He had no words. For the first time in his life, the great orator was completely silent. I stepped past my parents, ignoring them entirely. The wealthy investors and the devoted parishioners parted from me like the Red Sea. They scrambled out of my way, pulling their chairs back and staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. I walked down the center aisle until I stood directly in front of the stage. I looked up at Trayvon. He was gripping the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles were white. He was trapped and he knew it. I raised the wireless microphone to my lips. You put every single corporate account, every property deed, every LLC in my name, Trayvon. I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and cutting through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. You forged documents and structured the entire Vance Community Trust with me listed as the sole managing director. You built a $20 million house of cards and you put my signature on the bottom line. Trayvon opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his tailored shirt. You did it to make me your fall guy. I continued, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. You needed a scapegoat. When Apex Capital came to collect the $20 million you squandered on luxury cars and offshore investments, you were going to be on a chartered jet to South America. You booked the flight for 2 a.m. You were going to leave me behind to take the federal indictment and go to prison for your crimes. You thought I was just the quiet sister you could push around. You thought I was stupid. I stopped at the bottom of the stage stairs. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. But you forgot one tiny detail in your brilliant master plan, Trayvon. I said, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. I am a licensed wealth management advisor. I spend my life auditing complex financial structures. I know how to track missing assets, and I know exactly how to read the fine print. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my digital tablet. I held it up. The screen instantly synced with the massive LED displays behind Trayvon. The flowchart disappeared, replaced by a live view of the corporate banking portal. Because I am the sole legal owner of those accounts, I do not need your permission to access them, I announced. The law views me as the sole proprietor, the sole. Therefore, I have the absolute legal right to reallocate the corporate funds as I see fit. Trayvon's eyes bulged. He lunged forward, leaving the podium and stumbling toward the edge of the stage. Wait, he gasped, extending a shaking hand toward me. Nia, wait. You do not know what you are doing. I did not flinch. 30 minutes ago, while you were adjusting your tuxedo and practicing your lies, I logged into a secure offline server. I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I liquidated every single one of your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I drained the boutique shell company. I took every penny of the illicit cash you washed over the past 3 years. I turned my back to Trayvon and faced the crowd. I scanned the rows of tables until I found the faces I was looking for. Sister Washington sat near the back, clutching her worn leather purse. Deacon Morris stood beside her, looking bewildered. I paid off the mortgages of all 50 elderly parishioners whose homes you stole, I declared, looking directly at the pioneers of our church. The Vance Community Trust is fully dissolved. Apex Capital has been paid in full, and the property deeds are currently being transferred back into your names free and clear. Your homes are safe. No one is taking them from you. Sister Washington let out a loud, piercing sob, covering her face with her hands. Deacon Morris wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes shining with tears. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the congregation members as they realized the catastrophic danger they had just narrowly escaped. I turned my attention to the front rows where the wealthy investors and local politicians sat in stunned silence. Their checkbooks were still sitting on the tables. As for the Phantom Community Center project, I continued raising the tablet higher. I just refunded every single community investor their initial deposit. I reversed the wire transfers. The money is back where it belongs. You will not be funding Trayvon's luxury escape today. The heavy silence in the ballroom broke. It did not break with applause or shouting. It broke with a sudden, synchronized symphony of electronic chimes. Hundreds of cell phones began to ping and buzz simultaneously. The wealthy donors and corporate investors frantically reached into their pockets and purses, pulling out their devices. Gasps of relief and shouts of shock erupted across the tables. "It is here," a prominent real estate developer shouted, staring at his phone screen. "The $500,000 is back in my account." He reversed the wire. A city councilwoman gasped, showing her phone to the man beside her. The money was actually refunded. The ballroom descended into joyous, absolute chaos. People were hugging each other, crying out in relief and pointing aggressively at the stage. The illusion was completely shattered. The great Bishop Jerome Vance and his golden son were no longer respected leaders. They were exposed predators, and the entire city of Atlanta was watching them fall. I turned slowly back to the stage. Trayvon was completely frozen. His mouth hung open in a silent scream of agony. His hands trembled violently as he reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his own smartphone. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen as he frantically logged into his encrypted banking application. He stared at the screen and his knees buckled. He dropped heavily onto the polished stage floor, the fabric of his expensive trousers tearing against the wood. He stared at the digital balance displayed on his phone. It was zero. The $20 million escape fund, the money he needed to flee the country and avoid federal prison, was completely gone, drained, zeroed out. He looked up at me from the floor, his eyes hollow and completely defeated. He had nothing left. No money, no leverage, no escape plan. He was a king without a kingdom, a predator caught in his own meticulously designed trap. I looked down at my brother, feeling no pity and no remorse. I lowered the microphone, hitting the power button and letting the ballroom fall to the chaotic noise of the crowd. I turned my back on Trayvon Vance, my crimson gown sweeping the floor, and walked straight through the center aisle of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of his fake empire burning behind me. I had barely taken 5 steps down the center aisle when the primal roar of a cornered animal echoed behind me. I stopped and turned just in time to see Trayvon completely snap. The slick, calculated pastor vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, terrified man who had just realized his execution was no longer a metaphor. He scrambled off the polished stage, his bespoke tuxedo jacket tearing loudly as he caught it on a massive floral arrangement. He did not care. He kicked a heavy wooden chair out of his way, his eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed entirely on me. "I owe dangerous people money," Trayvon screamed, his voice raw and tearing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. Saliva flew from his mouth as he shoved past a wealthy investor who tried to block his path. "Apex Capital is going to kill me. You just killed me, Nia. You killed me." He was closing the distance fast. His fists were balled, and his face was a mask of pure, unfiltered violence. The crowd around us scattered instantly, women screaming in terror and men pulling their wives back from the impending collision. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my feet remained firmly planted on the thick carpet. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I looked directly into the eyes of the brother who had tried to frame me for his monumental sins, ready to take whatever hit he was about to throw. But the hit never came. Before Trayvon's outstretched hands could even graze the fabric of my crimson gown, the heavy gilded doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with the force of a thunderclap. "Federal agents, nobody move!" The commanding shout cut through the panic like a blade. A massive swarm of men and women in dark tactical jackets emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI flooded into the opulent room. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. I recognized Agent Reynolds leading the primary strike team, his eyes scanning the screaming crowd before locking dead onto Trayvon. The digital ledger I had decrypted in the hotel room, combined with Nana Pearl's meticulously gathered physical evidence, had been more than enough. When I hit send on that encrypted email to Reynolds 3 hours ago, I handed the federal government a perfectly wrapped financial crime scene. They had secured the federal warrants before the gala even began. "Trayvon Vance, get on the ground," Reynolds barked, drawing his weapon and aiming it directly at my brother's chest. Trayvon froze his momentum, carrying him forward a few clumsy steps before he realized he was entirely surrounded. He looked at the federal agents, then at the glowing screens displaying his forged offshore accounts, and finally at me. 2 agents did not wait for him to comply. They hit him simultaneously from the side, tackling him incredibly hard to the carpet. The sickening thud of Trayvon's body hitting the ground was followed by the sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs locking around his wrists. He writhed and thrashed against the floor, his expensive suit ruined, screaming obscenities as the agents pinned him down by his shoulders. Across the room, the illusion of the perfect power couple shattered entirely. Kiara, who had been standing frozen near the stage stairs, suddenly snapped into survival mode. She realized her diamond-studded safety net had just been obliterated. With a panicked shriek, she kicked off her 6-inch designer heels, leaving them abandoned on the polished wood floor. She reached around her neck violently, unclasping the diamond tennis necklace paid for by stolen tithes, and let it drop to the floor. She spun around and sprinted toward the kitchen service doors, shoving a terrified waiter out of the way. She was fast, but she was not fast enough. Stop right there. 2 female FBI agents flanking the perimeter intercepted her escape route. Kiara tried to dodge, slipping on the spilled champagne from a dropped tray, but the agents were merciless. They tackled her against a towering dessert cart, sending crystal platters of pastries crashing to the ground in a massive explosion of sugar and glass. Kiara screamed, kicking her bare feet against the wall, as the agents swiftly wrenched her arms behind her back. "Let me go! I did not do anything! He lied to me! Trayvon lied to me!" Kiara shrieked, her flawless makeup smearing as dark tears streamed down her face. The heavy click of the handcuffs silenced her violent protests. The entire ballroom was in a state of absolute shock. The elite of Atlanta, the city council members, the wealthy donors, and the devoted congregation were all standing frozen, holding their phones up to record the spectacle. The Great Vance Family Ministries, a pillar of the community, was being dismantled on live stream. Flashbulbs went off rapidly as local press reporters, initially invited to cover a philanthropic triumph, now scrambled to capture the historic fall of a corrupt empire. Through the sea of federal agents and terrified guests, I saw them. Bishop Jerome and Yvonne Vance, the architects of this toxic family dynamic. The people who had blindly enabled a monster while consistently treating me as an afterthought. Their reputations were utterly annihilated. They had stood on that stage and demanded $10 million from their congregation, fully endorsing a project that was nothing more than a criminal money laundering scheme. Everyone in this room, and everyone watching the live news feeds across the city, now knew that the bishop and his wife were either incredibly foolish or entirely complicit. Either way, their spiritual and financial reign over Atlanta was officially dead. My parents pushed past a line of shocked investors, their faces stripped of all arrogance and pride. They looked small, fragile, and utterly desperate. They ran toward me, their expensive evening wear looking suddenly ridiculous against the backdrop of a federal raid. Yvonne reached me first, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she grabbed my bare arms. Her sapphire gown was stained with spilled wine, and her perfectly styled hair was coming undone. "Nia, please!" She wept, her voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched desperation I had never heard from her before. Tears ruined her heavy mascara, leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. "Tell them it is a mistake. You control those accounts. You can fix this. Tell the agents it was a misunderstanding." My father grabbed my shoulder, his heavy gold rings digging painfully into my skin. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he looked over at Trayvon being hauled to his feet by the FBI. "Nia, listen to your mother, Bishop." Jerome begged, his deep, commanding voice reduced to a frantic, terrified whisper. "You have the power to stop this. You can explain the reallocations to the authorities. We can handle this privately. Do not let them take your brother. Do not let them take our church. We are your parents. We are your blood. You have to save this family." I looked at the 2 people who had given me life. I looked at the hands gripping my arms, hands that had never once reached out to protect me when Trayvon was destroying my reputation. Hands that had happily signed off on my banishment when they thought I was a liability to their pristine public image. They were not begging for justice. They were not begging for the 50 elderly parishioners who had almost lost their homes. They were begging for their brand. They were begging for the comfortable, luxurious lie they had lived for decades. A heavy, profound silence settled within my own mind, entirely separated from the screaming sirens and shouting agents around us. For 30 years, I had craved their validation. For 30 years, I had worked twice as hard as Trayvon just to earn a passing nod of approval from my father. I had stayed up late auditing their books, protecting their assets, and ensuring their legacy remained spotless. And in return, they had chosen the golden son who viewed them as nothing more than a bank to rob. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No anger, no sorrow, no lingering desire to belong to the Vance family. My veins flowed with absolute ice. I looked down at my mother's shaking hands still gripping my arms. I reached up and slowly, deliberately peeled her fingers off my skin, dropping her hands back to her sides. I stepped back, severing the physical connection between us. Nia, my father, gasped, realizing that his emotional manipulation was completely failing. Please. I looked Bishop Jerome directly in the eye, holding his terrified gaze with a calm, unwavering authority that made him shrink back. You told me failures do not belong in this family, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the ballroom like a diamond edge. You were right. I looked at my mother, who was sobbing openly, her face buried in her hands. I looked back at the stage where the screens were still broadcasting the irrefutable evidence of their greed. Enjoy your legacy, Bishop. I did not wait for his response. I did not need to see the final realization of his total defeat. I turned around and began to walk. I stepped around my parents as if they were nothing but dust on the floor. I walked down the long carpeted corridor toward the main exit, moving through the crowd of federal agents and bewildered guests. Nobody tried to stop me. Agent Reynolds caught my eye as I passed the main doors, giving me a brief, respectful nod of acknowledgement. He had his criminal, and I had my freedom. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Buckhead Grand Hotel and stepped out into the cool, humid Atlanta night. The air tasted incredibly sweet. A fleet of police cruisers and federal black SUVs were parked haphazardly across the front drive, their red and blue lights flashing rhythmically against the stone columns of the building. I walked past the chaos, my crimson gown flowing behind me, my head held high. I did not look back at the flashing lights, and I did not look back at the hotel. The war for the Vance family was over, and I had burned it to the ground to save the people who actually mattered. I hailed a cab waiting at the end of the block, sliding into the quiet sanctuary of the back seat. Where to miss, the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I smiled, feeling a genuine, profound peace settle over my entire soul. Anywhere, I replied. I finally have the whole world to myself. The next morning, the local news networks had enough material to run uninterrupted coverage for weeks. The footage of my brother being dragged out of the Buckhead Grand Hotel in federal handcuffs played on a continuous loop across every major channel. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and entirely public. Trayvon and Kiara were formally indicted on 15 counts of federal fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. The charging documents outlined a conspiracy so vast and meticulously detailed, thanks to my digital footprint dump, that no defense attorney in the state wanted to touch the case. They were facing decades in federal prison without the possibility of parole. I watched their arraignment on television, sipping my morning coffee as Kiara wept uncontrollably at the defense table. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a standard-issue county jumpsuit, her diamond necklaces swapped for steel chains. Trayvon looked hollowed out, staring blankly ahead as the judge read the staggering list of charges against him. There was no manufactured charm left to save him. The fallout for my parents was equally devastating, though it played out in boardrooms and society columns rather than federal court. Bishop Jerome Vance, the untouchable spiritual titan of Atlanta, was summoned to an emergency meeting by the megachurch board of directors. The very men and women who had kissed his ring for years now demanded his immediate resignation. They gave him an ultimatum to step down quietly or face a full forensic audit of his personal ministries spanning the last 2 decades. My father chose survival over pride. He resigned in absolute disgrace, his name stripped from the church signs and his portrait removed from the grand foyer. My mother fell the hardest. Yvonne had built her entire identity on social currency and manufactured prestige. The moment the scandal broke, her high society friends vanished. The country club memberships were quietly revoked, and the invitations to charity galas stopped arriving. With their primary sources of illicit wealth frozen by the federal government and their massive church salary terminated, the bank swiftly foreclosed on their sprawling suburban mansion. I drove past their new residence a few weeks later. It was a tiny rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. I watched from a distance as Yvonne struggled to carry a cheap plastic grocery bag up a flight of rusted metal stairs. Her sapphire gowns and lavish luncheons were nothing but ghosts now. She had traded her daughter for a legacy that crumbled to dust the moment the truth saw the light of day. With the Vance empire reduced to ashes, I finally had the space to breathe. A month after the gala, I drove out to the quiet green hills of the local cemetery. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. I walked along the manicured stone pathways until I reached a simple, elegant headstone resting beneath the shade of a massive oak tree. Nana Pearl. I knelt on the soft grass and placed a vibrant bouquet of yellow lilies against the gray granite. Yellow was her favorite color. It symbolized joy, resilience, and the warm truth she had always brought into my life. I traced the engraved letters of her name with my fingertips, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my spirit. I had done exactly what she asked of me. I had not just cleared my own name and protected my hard-earned professional license. I had saved the community she loved so fiercely. The 50 elderly parishioners who had nearly lost everything were safe. Their mortgages were paid, their deeds were secure, and their generational wealth remained intact. The predatory loans were gone, and the perpetrators were locked in federal holding cells. I had stopped the cycle of exploitation that my family had perpetuated for generations. I sat by her grave for a long time, listening to the wind rustle through the oak leaves. I did not need to speak aloud. She knew. The truth was finally in the light, and the innocent were protected. I stood up, brushed the grass from my knees, and walked back to my car. My past was buried here, but my future was waiting. The elevator doors opened smoothly, revealing the pristine top floor of a downtown high-rise. I stepped out into the reception area of my newly established, fully independent wealth management firm. The space was a reflection of everything I had built, sleek, modern, and completely transparent. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. Sunlight flooded the polished hardwood floors and the minimalist leather furniture. My staff greeted me with crisp, professional nods as I walked down the main corridor. The atmosphere was sharply focused. I was no longer the quiet sister working in the shadows of a megachurch. In the financial district, I was now respected, feared, and fiercely independent. The industry knew exactly who had dismantled the Vance family ministries, and they knew I possessed the intellect and the ruthlessness to protect my clients at all costs. I walked into my corner office and closed the heavy glass door behind me. The room was immaculate, free of clutter and distractions. I walked around my massive mahogany desk, but before I sat down, I paused. I turned to look at the wall to my right. Hanging there in a sleek black frame under museum-quality glass was a copy of a highly specific bank document. It was the canceled check for $160,000. The exact amount Trevon had initially demanded I wash for him, the catalyst for the entire war. It was not a reminder of family or betrayal. It was a trophy. It was undeniable proof that I had faced the darkest corners of corporate and spiritual corruption and emerged entirely victorious. I had taken their greatest weapon and turned it into the very instrument of their destruction. I ran a hand over the smooth back of my leather desk chair and sat down. The city of Atlanta stretched out before me, a vast landscape of opportunity and endless potential. I leaned back, crossed my arms, and looked directly forward. I was the architect of my own empire now. I smiled confidently at the camera. Fade to black.